Let me get the meeting up and running. All right. Ms. Wells,
Here.
Mr. Witherspoon,
Here.
Mr. Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Cantor,
Here.
and Mr. Schulman.
Here,
You have a quorum.
okay. I guess we are expecting Josh to attend. In order to just give him another minute or two, he may or may not make it in that time. Let's take action on the minutes. If I can have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 19th meeting.
I'll move it.
Okay, Galen moves. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Nick seconds.
I
Any-
think Rod second.
Oh, I
just wasn't-
apologize.
I wasn't here. for it,
Apologize,
so
Rod.
Otherwise I would have.
Okay.
Any comments or discussion on the minutes? All right, seeing none, let's call the question. Let's just do this with hands raised. All those in favor? Nick, were you not at the meeting?
I was not at the meeting.
Okay.
I was not at the
Um,
meeting either.
Oh, dear. That only gives us three members. I apologize. We'll have to wait until the end of the meeting until we have Josh with us, because Josh was at the meeting. All right, we'll go on with our business. Meeting is formally called to order. We've done a roll call. We have one public hearing this evening, and that is 2021-09 SP, Spinnaker Real Estate Partners LLC, Coastal Lofts LLC, 810 and 18 Monroe Street, 2 and 4 Chestnut Street, 75 and 77 South Main Street, proposed multi-building mixed-use project to include commercial office, retail, restaurant, 150 residential units, and off-street parking units. For the public that may be listening and that may wish to participate, let me briefly go over how our process works. First, the representatives of Spinnaker will go over the project with and for us. At any time during their presentation, if zoning commissioners have questions they want to have answered, they can ask those questions. When the presentation is completed, the public will have an opportunity to ask questions as well. Keep in mind, typically, there's only one opportunity for the public to speak. We do not usually find it necessary to limit how long people can speak. So you should have enough time to say anything you wish regarding the project. But you only get that one opportunity. All we ask is that it be you ask your questions, make your comments politely and with respect to both the commission members and the presenters. Once everyone who wishes to speak has spoken, the Spinnaker representatives will have an opportunity to respond to the questions and make any final comments they wish to. Again, during that time, should commissioners have questions, they're welcome to ask them. I know in advance, before we even take a vote on it, that we will not close this hearing this evening. Our contractor who is responsible for reviewing the project has been working with Spinnaker, but has not yet presented his final comments. So we will continue this public hearing into our next meeting. Should any new information be presented, the public will then have an opportunity to speak. And those who want to comment on new information will have an opportunity to speak a second time as well. With that, I'll turn it over to representative from Spinnaker. And please introduce yourself.
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. I'm Matt Evertson with Spinnaker Real Estate Partners, and here tonight to represent the applicant of the special permit, as you mentioned, 2021-09. Colin, if you can share your screen, you want to get that up there.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, so while you're doing that, I'll try to continue to give you the overview. That the applicant is a joint venture between the principals of Spinnaker Real Estate Partners of South Norwalk and Coastal Development of Westport. The partnership is a contract purchaser of 7 separate contiguous parcels, all currently under independent ownership located in South Norwalk. Spinnaker, in collaboration with many of the same design team members on this project, has successfully developed or redeveloped a number of prominent properties in the city of Norwalk over the past 3 decades, oftentimes in close collaboration with the city and its redevelopment agency. Those projects include, amongst others, the Corsa Factory, the Lock Building, Sonolofts, Norton Park, the Maritime Garage, Maritime Yards, Ironworks, 19 Day Street, and most recently, Brim and Crown at the East North train station, and currently under construction, the platform, which is adjacent to this project at the South North train station. We are excited to continue our work in and with the city on this pending project. The applicant has provided city staff with documentation from the current property owners authorizing the applicant to submit this application on their behalf. In addition, notices regarding this application and this public hearing were sent to abutters, and 2 notices were published in the hour. Evidence of such has been provided to staff. We have also presented this project to the Code Enforcement Administrative Committee of the City of Norwalk and received sign-offs from DPW and WPCA. As some of you may recall, we first presented details of this project to the Zoning Commission back in the April 8th meeting. Since then, we have received comprehensive comments from the respective city departments, the redevelopment agency, and the third-party peer review firm engaged by the city and the redevelopment agency to review this application. But as such, the plans have evolved to address the majority of the comments, and we believe we have provided appropriate rationale for any comments that these current plans were unable to accommodate. For public record purposes, the design team will present the full current set of plans, but will also identify certain adjustments made from prior plans that were motivated by these comments. As a result of our adjustment to the plans in response to these comments, it is our understanding, as was mentioned, that the final third-party design review report and presentation will not be available tonight, and that those findings will be presented at the June 23rd meeting. The project is located in South Norwalk with prominent frontage on South Main, Monroe, and Chestnut Streets. The 7 parcels include 8, 10, 18 Monroe Street, 75 and 77 South Main Street, and 2 and 4 Chestnut Street. Those parcels will be consolidated into a single parcel of about 1.49 acres of land area. 2 of those 7 structures have been deemed historically significant and will be maintained and restored. 18 Monroe Street will include a complete gut renovation and will be added to the local historic inventory. 8 Monroe Street received an exterior renovation, but will maintain the existing local small business tenants that occupy those storefronts. The balance of the property is proposed to be improved with a new structure. Together, those 3 buildings will include 150 housing units, of which 15 or 10% will be designated as workforce housing units, about 15,000 square feet of commercial uses, 157 off-street parking spaces, resident amenity areas, and a highly designed public realm space fronting Monroe Street that we'll go into in some detail. The unit mix for the housing units is 46 studios, 71 bedroom units, 32 2-bedroom units, and 2 3-bedroom units. So this is a special permit request and not a site plan application as a result of the applicant requesting this commission to consider its regulation, which specifies I quote, "In order to encourage the preservation of structures contributing to positive aspects of community character, the commission may, by special permit, allow a minimum area or dimensional requirement or maximum requirement to be exceeded. This application meets all setback and parking requirements, but exceeds overall floor area ratio by 22.25% and residential density by 16.27%. We strongly believe the presentation of the two buildings adds a tremendous value to the neighborhood, but doing so did pose some design limitations as well as economic challenges. The design team will provide supporting information and rationale on those challenges in order to meet the stated conditions of this regulation." The design team is comprised of Beinfeld Architecture. You'll hear from Colin Crowther from that firm for the overall design. Redness and Mean for the civil engineering, and Vincent will give you an overview of that. Eric Rains, landscape architect, and I believe Eric is going to review his plans and his vision with you guys. And then on traffic, Mike Galanti of Hardesty in Hanover. And with that, I turn it over to Colin and take us through the plans, Colin.
All right, thanks, Matt. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, wonderful. So just orientating everyone, the site, as Matt noted, is fronting on Chestnut, Monroe, and South Main. It's the north third or so of the block, directly across from the South Norwalk Police Headquarters. And then current conditions is here, looking from the north to the south. We can see number 8 Monroe, which is one of the structures that's being preserved with the existing tenancy and long-term local businesses that have been cultivating their patrons from the area. South Main Street continuing here. And then the number 18 Monroe Street, which is the former Central Hotel, circa turn of the century, and was in existence for quite a long period of time. So looking forward to renovating and repurposing that building. The design team worked diligently to respond to the design reviewer comments. The nexus of the project is really this central courtyard that's opposite the police station, and that's seen as really being the draw for the project and creating a very nice public space or public-private space on the way to the train station, and really helping to fill in these missing gaps in the streetscape and in the city as you transit from the train station to Washington Street and other parts of the city, or as you're returning to the train station, but also creating a very enriching place for the residents of these buildings and the patrons of these establishments to enjoy. So one of the comments was related to the landscaping. We worked very hard to reduce the landscaping and the appearance of no walk zones. So, excessive planting beds or plant material that would make people feel like they weren't really invited into the plaza. We've developed a bosque concept of trees. So very much limbed up trees in stems that kind of meet the plaza material. The green surface, as Eric can talk to, is seen as a very minimal turf, just covering the area and infilling the design of the plaza in those areas where the trees are. We've developed these 2 flanking structures that are freestanding pergolas from the buildings. The suggestion of the reviewer to kind of create some symmetry and draw people in, and also provide some outdoor space for the tenants that hopefully will be active tenants, like a bakery or a small cafe or even a small restaurant in the spaces that flank the plaza. So creating this active use that looks out into the plaza and creates activity in the mid to the late day and early evening. There was our last presentation to you really had a traditional inferred curbed driveway. So it was much more of a drive court. We've abandoned that concept, as you'll see later when the plan views, but now it's much more of a cohesive plaza design, very regimented grid is reinforced by the structures above, and it's a flush curb and really just an entry and an exit point off of the curbs, and that can be temporarily closed off to vehicles with removable or retractable bollards. to allow activity to take place, similar to what's going on in Ironworks Courtyard. There was also some concern about the green screens that had been in this area in the previous plan, and those have been removed, and we've maintained some planting there to create some visual buffer of the plaza space from the traffic. We're also proposing new openings in 8 and 18 onto the courtyard, and we're continuing to work with the city as to the optimal configuration of Monroe Street. But that dialogue is happening outside of this application, and we're going to continue to work with them to respond to whatever concerns they have in terms of traffic management, bike lanes, on-street parking, fronting on the site. So we've been moving along with that discussion. Overview of the plan hasn't changed too much, except we previously had a drive entry here that's now been reclaimed as commercial tenancy. So hopefully that'll be tenanted with another active tenant that will be able to take advantage of the courtyard. As you can see, the design is a very regimented plaza grid, and we've really just provided the entry and exit points for this drive-through and drive under from the central structure. Eric Rains, landscape architect, has some examples later on of how this can be fit up with different activities, and also how the vehicle passage would work. So the passage through this is coming in off of the west side of Monroe Street, and then entering the plaza. You're guided by the retractable bollards, which are just kind of on an angle, and then guide you under the pergola structure in the middle. And then you're able to exit again out through the curb ramp. But in general, this is very loosely defined, mostly by bollards and lighting elements, and just the apparent flow as you exit the street. With your vehicle, you can come in and you can temporarily stand here. You can drop off a passenger. You can get picked up by an Uber or a Lyft, and then you can leave back into the traffic flow. So that's how that scene is working. And then the bollards can be placed at the edge of the plaza, and it can be closed off for more pedestrian orientated activity. And there's some examples of that later. Since we did lose the garage entry that was previously shown here, we relocated it and added one. So on South Main and on Chestnut Street, there's an ingress and an egress to the garage, providing access for vehicles, and also redundancy should there be an issue with any sort of gatekeeping at either one of those gates. You're still able to get into and out of the garage. We've also added bicycle parking for the residents. So currently there's a storage room on Chestnut Street, and then there's some bicycle parking for short term on either side of the plaza, and potential for some street side bicycle parking on either side of the entry and the exit. Many of the city light poles were removed in favor of building mounted lighting for the sidewalks. That was a request from the TMP department, as the sidewalks, particularly around 8, are challenged. And also moving down onto South Main, we made great efforts to increase as much sidewalk space as possible by pulling the storefronts back to allow the door swings to be clear of the pedestrian zone, and then pushing out this curb extension into the parallel parking area, which allows you to get better sight lines, and also keeps the ramping minimal to allow the sidewalk to just pass right by the building, and pedestrians and people pushing strollers and wheelchair users can just continue a little bit less obstructed and don't have to transit over a ramping drive aisle. We did add a loading and trash collection zone here. That's on the civil plans, and Vince, the civil engineer, can speak to that a little bit more. We have maintained the 3 on-street metered stalls that there currently, and the city's asked us to look at providing an allowance for a future pay station. So we've done that, and we'll continue to coordinate with them. That pretty much wraps up the first floor. A quick look up above, we've got a second tier of parking, which is how we get to our 157 spaces total. This is the typical residential level at the courtyard. There's a small resident amenity space, as well as your typical appointments in the central courtyard, such as a pool, some sort of a hangout bar structure that's yet to be designed. So that'll be a shade structure with some grill stations likely, and other amenities that residents use, as well as lounge areas. And the units on this level do have their own private terraces that front on the landscaped courtyard. It's got a southern exposure, so it should get good all day light throughout most portions of the day. And then the floor plan replicates itself up through the building. At the fourth level, per zoning, we step back, so it gets a little bit reduced, and the unit typology changes on the street frontages. So the units that front to the north, excuse me, on the courtyard have relatively gracious private terraces, as well as good views, as do the eastern and the western units that are stepped back. So you get some very nice private space up there. The interior program remains the same and consistent with the program below. Getting into the reviewer comments on what we're doing to the historic or the existing buildings, number 8.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Can you go back to the design and point out for us where the workforce housing units are located?
I can cover that. I have a whole slide for that if you want to, if
No,
I
that-
can come back to that.
No, that's fine. You can come back to it.
Okay. Let me just make a note, workforce, before I kick it to Mike. So going back to the reviewer comments, he was curious as to what we were doing and proposing on the existing structures. This is number 18, the Central Hotel. We'd be cleaning up the masonry, stripping it of the existing paint, repointing and repairing it as needed. If we deem that repainting is necessary, or in the interest of the building, then we could repaint it as well. Be doing repairs to the upper cornice, bringing that back to life and extending the retail entablature all the way down Chestnut Street. This is the Chestnut Street elevation that we're looking at, and reopening the existing and previously existing window openings that are there, as well as installing building mounted lighting to light the sidewalk. Much of the same stuff is going on the north elevation, be adding new awnings, new storefronts. There's existing appurtenances and fire escapes that are on here. We'd be looking to remove those and repair the whatever damage was caused to the facade by the installation of those, and take the existing doors and return those to being windows, so that it's a much more architecturally consistent facade with the nice character that this conveys to the street. You can see this is one of the steel structures that flanks the plaza that we're proposing here. So that would allow the tenant on the plaza side of the building to have some space that's covered and shaded from the sun and visually interesting, and somewhat mitigate the scale discrepancy between the two flanking existing buildings that flank the plaza. Also proposing, if possible, we'd like to get a small roof terrace here for the office tenants that are seen as being in the upper stories of this building. This would be a view from the courtyard, where you can see the removal of the existing appurtenances and the creation of the roof plaza or terrace, and then the opening of some existing openings. There are 3 existing openings here, so trying to keep within those or expanding them slightly, keeping the same classic vocabulary, and infilling them with some glazed openings and some access, so that again, that tenant can access the courtyard and take advantage of the space that we're creating. There's also some steel work on the back of the building that we'd be looking to remove, and this little shed here, really clean that up and reprogram those windows, give it new windows and that sort of stuff. Looking at number 8, it's much the same. We'd be looking to unify the signage with a future application. Thank you. Excuse me. Getting water. Be looking to unify the signage package, provide new storefronts, clean up the masonry, install the new building mounted lighting. And yeah, I think that's pretty much the extent of that one. And then on the plaza side, which I think is a few slides later, be adding some new cladding because this is really just a blank wall and doesn't have any openings. So we've looked at adding some storefronts and some new Corten cladding to give some more visual interest to this part of the building.
Are you expecting the same tenants to be there, or are you?
Yeah, well, one of the things that Matt mentioned is that this has longstanding tenants in the building, and they're looking to maintain those tenants and keep their businesses going. So hopefully just replacing things that can be done and upgrading while they can stay in business. So not looking to relocate them. This is just an example of kind of our vision for those shade structures. So it's a steel form with shade elements that are suspended from it, but completely separate from the existing building. So those would be built out for the use of those tenants, but and anyone else, but a separate structure. So again, we've looked, this is an aerial view of the courtyard and the project. You can kind of see how it's relating to the under construction One Chestnut platform building that's being constructed right now, how this existing building relates to the new building, as well as the corner building with the existing tenants. And there is this sizable, about 8,000, 9,000 square foot courtyard that's being created, and it really provides some nice respite and a good change from what's currently existing.
Colin, I'm sorry for interrupting. Whoever has that person speaking in the background, can you please mute yourself so that we can hear Colin's presentation? Thank you. Please continue.
No problem. Thank you. Yeah. There was some question about the facades and the variation of the facades. I'll take you through some of the details that we looked at, and we provided additional architectural drawings through the various facades, and just kind of so you can get a better picture of how those work and how the ins and the outs of the buildings work. But generally this sets the scene and shows the context of what's going on. This is the central steel facade, which is really just seen as this gridded steel structure with maximizing the glass and the steel windows that are in those openings. Probably going to need to frame that out of steel based on the thicknesses that we're looking to achieve, and then a traditional wood frame building over the top of that. This upper portion is clad in the fiber cement lap siding that we've successfully used, and is currently being installed at the One Chestnut project. This resident gets a particularly generous exterior terrace, and then you can see down here how the building is projecting out over the plaza, creating almost an outdoor vestibule or loggia for people to wait for others, hang out, read a book, do outside activities, but still feel connected to the building that they're a resident of, but also a part of the outdoors. This is the courtyard facade, one of the flanking facades from that central portion. This is more of a traditional wood frame building over the concrete podium, but it's seen as being a Corten metal rain screen with the double height windows on the first floor to really continue that gracious lobby that's seen as being like a very amenitized hotel lobby, or the restaurant or retail tenant that's fronting on the courtyard. And the same fiber cement siding continues over the top of the upper portion of the building. This is the Chestnut Street facade. So this is seen as being two different types of the fiber cement lap siding, which we're also doing at the One Chestnut building, two different exposures. So there's a tighter 4-inch exposure here. So very, very tight linear bands. And then it gets wider at 6-inch exposure at the upper portion in the step back of the building. And these units you can see have a nice terrace at the step back. And then there's a little bit of a recess of the facade at the Chestnut Street level. So that's pulled back to create some depth and create a little bit more sidewalk space and room for plantings and visual interest at that level. And you can see here, there's an architectural canopy that's been added to the garage entrance on Chestnut Street. South Main is, I believe we had discussed it being a series of 4 almost mercantile buildings appearing as 4-story, 3 over the retail level. Still seen as that. We added some more embellishment and detail work to those. What is seen as a simulated wood built up cornice at the top of the building. That's also creating the guardrail, so there's no need for a secondary railing there. That's being taken care of by the extended parapet. We've got some additional brick detailing in the head and the row lock sills that are being provided. Storefront is being recessed far enough back so that the door swing is not going to impinge on the pedestrian passage as you go down the already narrow sidewalk. And then we've adorned it with some of these patras plates that are often used as decoration to tie back the historic structure inside the building. These are just purely decorative. The upper portion is the fiber cement cladding that we're using throughout the building.
Colin, are you using any of that fiber cement on the lower part of the building?
I think only in very secondary facades. We may have it coming down in some of the spots that are, let me go back to the overall rendering. I think we may have it coming down kind of in this space between the two buildings here, a little bit closer to grade. But in general, it's at the upper levels, and again, it may come down here, I believe, in the area where nobody's really going. It's more of a back of house, access to mechanical rooms and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's up above at this upper penthouse level, and then back in the courtyard area.
Thank you.
Yep. Let's see, I think it was there. Yep. Yep. So just showing a detail of the brick sill and the headers there. So that's just, we feel we addressed the reviewer's comments with all of those. This is just a rendering indicating that and showing how we're again, how we feel that's going to look with the brick detailing, the heads and the sills, the patras plates, the on-street parking, the bump out that's coming out, some potential retail stores. There is access. We do have a potential pedestrian access that could be opened up through here to get to the garage. This is exit discharge from the upper levels of the building. So we've got 2 separate retail zones that could happen here, depending on how that wants to get subdivided. You could have up to 3 tenants with relatively modest stores, or you could have one larger shop front and a smaller one that's about 700 square feet there. The garage entry is seen as blending in by maintaining the divided lights that are carrying across in the shop front there to bring the scale of that opening down and make it not feel quite so big. We did go and provide materials. I've already mentioned all of these. This is the chestnut facade, some of our inspirational images for that, just showing the 2 different hardy lap siding colors and the 2 different exposures. So the lower portion would be the tighter exposure. The upper portion would be the wider exposure. We do have, would like to see nicer architectural vents. It's our inspirational image for the lower portion, as well as the center portion of the Monroe Street facade as some sort of IPay rolling gate here to control some access to the alleyway there, and then some architectural louvers for the garage ventilation that we'll undoubtedly need. Central facade facing north is seen as being this primary steel structure. The Corten cladding on the left and the right, some fiber cement panel in this area with the lap siding at the upper levels there. And then this is being seen as a continuation of that mercantile building wrapping around, whereas I believe previously this was clipped and just the fiber cement siding, but we felt with the changes that we were making, it made a little bit more sense to bring that around and have that engage over the top of the 8 Monroe building in that instance. So we're very pleased with the way that came out. There's just some detail of what we're thinking on the South Main. Many of the same images, just a detail of the Patras plate. We've used stars before. In particular, I think you can see those on Sono Loft. Some examples of blade signs that could be installed by the merchants as part of the future signage package that stick off of the brick piers, and just a traditional storefront and the Rolock brick sill. We did colorize the southern elevation since it is on the lot line. There's not a ton we can do there since we're limited in openings on the large facades, but we are providing the green screen where we're stepping it back to, again, get some ventilation into the garage and providing some green screen there just to give something to that facade. I think with that, I will pull up the
workforce.
yeah, I'll pull up the workforce housing and then I can kick it over to Mike.
Let me note that Joshua Goldstein, another member of the commission, has joined us.
Hello, apologize for my tardiness tonight.
This one. Okay, so I'm not sure if I can zoom in on this, but this is the 15 workforce units. So we've got these locations, one here, one there, one there, there, and there and there. So we worked to disperse them as reasonably as we could throughout the building, across all the floors. So there, that plan.
Yeah, the unit types are proportionate to the overall unit count.
Yep.
as well.
And this was,
So, I mean, are they the same or varying square footages?
they're the
Like,
same
how big
unit.
How big are the units compared to everyone else?
They're not any smaller. They're just, we picked units within the stack of like units to be the workforce units. So they're not singled out as one stack of different units. It was dispersed
So
as best we could throughout the
Yeah, so
project.
the layouts are exactly the same and the finishes will be exactly the same. And our contractors won't know the difference when they're constructing this, if it's workforce or not.
And just
what
to,
is-
go ahead, Louis.
No, go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to ask, considering this is a public hearing, I think, just answer to the basic question, why only 15 workforce housing units?
So that's currently the zoning requirement. It's 10% of the overall unit count. In addition, in this zone, we will be paying a 1% fee. That's something that happened, I think, in 2018 as part of the rezoning of this district. And that fee goes to the city to be used to support affordable housing creation or preservation throughout the city.
How many units, excuse me, how many
Go
units,
ahead, Roger.
how many units are going to be lost due to the demolition of the current structures?
Including kind of the single room, single use, single room occupancy of 18 Monroe, which has been substantially vacant. And those are only like probably 100 to 200 square feet. It's 35 units that are currently on the site. None of which are deed restricted affordable.
Yeah, back to the question of the workforce units. Are they all one bedroom? Is it a mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms?
It's a mix. It's that schedule is
I'm sorry, I
is-
can't, it's too small for me to read.
Yeah, no, that was provided in the packets, but it looks like we've got 7 1-bedrooms, 3 2-bedrooms, and 5 studios, I believe.
Yeah, so it's
Yes.
proportionate to the
So
overall.
it's proportionate to the overall mix.
Okay, thank you.
Will the workforce housing tenants that are being displaced because of this project, will they be given priority? Like to,
So currently, there's no workforce housing tenants on the property. Technically, there's no affordable housing units. Nothing's deed restricted. Some of the rents are probably close to affordable, but they're not any public program or any requirement to keep them affordable. So we will, as part of our affirmative marketing plan, see if zoning staff will allow that to provide a priority for kind of tenants to come back to the site.
Yeah.
And outside of any obligation, we actually are working with, starting with one, but probably extend that to others to see if they want and can relocate into our workforce housing units across the street that we're building currently.
okay.
While we're on the subject, just can you, and I realize this isn't something that was exactly discussed in the presentation, and I realize I came a little late, so forgive me if I missed this, but can you talk a little bit about, community outreach, how you've reached out to the residents in the surrounding area? What have you done to engage the community?
Yeah, so we've talked to a number of the tenants of the existing buildings, both commercial and residential. They generally understand what's going on, and we will be working with them as if and when this project advances to make sure they find an appropriate home during this construction and potentially relocate back to the site. And we did send out, as part of our application a few months ago, notices to all the abutters, and have actually had followed with one of the neighboring property owners who seems to have strong support for the project. And then again, in advance of this public hearing, we sent out notices to the butters and also posted in the NorCal two public notices about this project.
Yeah, I really wasn't asking about legal requirements and legal notice requirements. I mean, I know you have to do that anyway. The question I'm asking is about what your plan for engaging the community is, and the community who lives around the train station and in South Norwalk. I guess, and let me do it forwards and backwards, sort of what have you done currently, and what is your plan to engage the community should we decide to approve this project?
Sure. So the property just to the south here is 79 South Main. It actually extends from South Main to Chestnut Street. We've had a couple of meetings with, it's owned by a nonprofit affordable housing group, Mutual Housing, and they're aware of the project. And we've had a few conversations with that board about the project, and they haven't voiced any real concerns. And pretty much everything across Chestnut Street, there's really no residents there except for the 16 residents that are in the Skirt Factory lofts that we recently renovated. And then the church comprises the majority of the balance of the block, the police stations across the street. And the same board that owns 79 South Main actually owns the houses kind of on the corner of Hanford and Chestnut. And then the other conversations that I've had with Mr. Barton, who owns the buildings on the other corner of Hanford and Chestnut, Hanford and South Main, sorry, on the northeast corner there, who he recently renovated those two buildings. He seems to be in support of the project.
Do you plan to reach out to like some, I believe, South Norwalk Citizens for Justice, or to meet with the 2 council representatives for District B?
So I think Darlene was in, she was, I'm not sure if she's on the board of Mutual Housing, but she was in one of the meetings with the board of Mutual Housing. So we didn't discuss the project with her. And we happily can extend an invite to the other local councilmen.
Yeah, I just want to, I mean, and Michael is right to ask that question, because when you said that, you'd reached out to various neighbors and there were no concerns, I don't think that's right. It's not a statement about the project. I think it's a community-wide sort of statement about, the rapid development of South Norwalk writ large. It's not specific to one project, but it's talking about a trend. And so I think you need to come up with a real plan to engage community stakeholders, because it doesn't really sound like you have one right now. And I think that's something collaborative that you can do with community leaders, such as, you know, the local council people from District B. And that's something you can do, you know, prospectively. It's not just about what you've done till now. So it just doesn't sound like you're there yet. But I hope you are, you know, that's something you would be committed to do throughout the, you know, duration of this project.
Sure, point taken. I think, I'm sure there's people out there, they haven't contacted us. This project has been, in addition to the public notices, there's been articles about this project, and we haven't seen any negative feedback directly to us, but happy to follow up and reach out to the council members and any other organizations or groups that you guys suggest.
Josh, you weren't here at the very beginning of the hearing when I pointed out that we're not going to be in a position this evening to act on this proposal. That being the case, maybe Matthew, you can have a response to Mr. Goldstein's concerns ready for the next meeting, the second meeting in June that we'll be holding. You know, some indication of who you now intend to meet with and so forth, so that we all feel more comfortable about community engagement.
Yeah,
I completely support what Louis just said.
Great.
Mr. Chairman, I believe Monday night there's, and Mr. Witherspoon may know as well, I believe it's a District B meeting Monday night. I think there, I think I was asked to come chat at that meeting, so I'm sure this topic will come up at that time as well.
Yes, I believe at 7:30 on Zoom.
Yeah, I think that's right.
On a separate thread, can you talk about any sort of green infrastructure that you're thinking for the project, solar or any other features that you're considering?
Sure, I think we can cover some of that with our civil engineers portion of the presentation. And
okay, great.
If we didn't cover anything else.
Thank you.
Matt, I think generally though, you do leave your buildings open for the future installation of solar. We provision for it, even if it's not part of the initial application, to future proof. So
right. In addition to stormwater kind of retention management, we do always have the infrastructure in place so that when we get down to the kind of final costing, we have the ability, whether and during initial construction or in the future, to provide solar panels on the roof.
Yeah, and outlets for electric cars in the garage.
Correct. Yeah. So that's obviously a requirement as part of your regulations, but we feel that we're going to have to exceed your regulation based on where the market's going. And even if we don't put all the meters in, we'll put the minimum that's required at the minimum. We will size our electric infrastructure to be able to expand that infrastructure.
Okay, Colin, we interrupted your presentation.
yeah, no, I was pretty much closing and I was ready to move it forward to traffic.
Okay.
So Mike, you're up.
Thank you. Good evening, Mike Galante, Hardesty in Hanover. I'd like to spend a few minutes chatting about the traffic report we prepared. We actually have prepared two traffic reports. The first one was from March of this year for the development, which I'll touch on in a minute. But the first slide, which is shown on the left on the screen, is basically what's already been discussed. It's a new development of, I think the key here is it's 150 residential units. There's obviously some restaurant and office space and retail space that will be added in or remain. And then against the existing development, the 35 units that Matt mentioned, and of course, there's some retail and restaurant space today. Under the new development, there is a parking garage, 157 spaces. Under the existing development, there's an ag-grade parking lot, and then certainly on-street parking to accommodate the commercial uses and the residential buildings that are on the properties. The next step, which is the graphic on the right, is the figure 1 from our traffic report. The red dots indicate the intersections that were included in the traffic study. These locations were selected for a couple of reasons. They're the key intersections serving this site. It also matches the study we prepared for 1 Chestnut Street, which is now under construction. And since we're in a pandemic, we used those approved traffic volumes for a 2026 traffic condition as a base, and then we added in the development that we're talking about tonight on top of that. The peak hours, sort of typical, 7 to 8 in the morning, in the afternoon, 4:45 to 5:45, and then on Saturday, 1 to 2 p.m. The volumes on the roads around South Main Street carries the highest volume, about 650 vehicles during each of those 3 peak hours. Monroe Street carries around 550 vehicles during the 3 peak hours. Saturday was actually slightly lower. And then Chestnut Street, basically on the west side of the site itself, and these are all two-way volumes, by the way, carries about 250 vehicles. So it gives you a range of volume as far as the streets surrounding the site itself. You can go to the third slide if you may, Colin. In the traffic study, the one from March and certainly the one from May of last month, actually, and I'll explain why there are 2 reports in a minute. But the report carried the volumes for the 4 intersections, the peak hours I just mentioned, AM, PM, and Saturday midday, which were the time periods we allocated and analyzed a few years ago for the one Chestnut Street. And it just simply made sense to be consistent and move that forward and add traffic on top of that condition. The design year is 2026, for 5 years from now, which is a requirement of the city itself. The purpose of the first traffic report was, as mentioned, the access to the garage was from Monroe Street, which is now a commercial space where the garage opening would have been. Based on discussions with the city traffic department, the team has many discussions with the traffic department and others within the city. There was concern about having that access to Monroe Street and coming out to Monroe Street, which has traffic volume and queuing in front of it from the traffic signal at South Main Street. The recommendation was to not have that driveway for a garage, but have a driveway to South Main Street and a second driveway to Chestnut Street. So that created the second traffic report, which is the one I'm really presenting tonight. The site traffic is the same in either case, and I've simplified it in the bottom left screen that you're looking at, where it talks about net increase in site traffic after credits. I've simplified it quite a bit, and what we did, and you'll see highlighted in green at the bottom, all of the traffic generated currently by the different uses on the subject properties, because there's multiple uses, we kept in the mix in the analysis itself. Reason being, one, some of the commercial spaces remaining, obviously the 35 units are not remaining. Some parking and traffic related to the existing land uses are on the street, parking on the street. Some is parking in the parking lot or from Monroe Street itself. To be conservative, we kept all of that traffic in the analysis as a background traffic addition. Volume traffic range for existing uses is anywhere from 70 to 100 vehicles during the different peak hours, weekday morning, weekday afternoon, and a Saturday midday. The Saturday midday was the highest at about 100 vehicles. The new development, which is the 150 units and maintaining some of the retail space and adding some retail space and so on, in rough round numbers, if you will, two-way volumes would generate about 105 to 145 trips during the same weekday morning, weekday afternoon, and Saturday midday peak hours. If you apply credits, which is someone living in one of the units, walking to the train station, or living in one of the units to go downstairs to a restaurant, or living in a unit and walking to Washington Street, we take credit for that. That's a fair and a reasonable approach, which is considered a transit and pedestrian credit, which is accepted certainly by the city and certainly by the state, which we will be they will review this at some point. The other credit that's applied to just the commercial space, and typically in the afternoon and Saturday peak hours, it's what's called a pass-by credit. I'm driving home from work and I decide to stop in the store and pick up something and then continue on my way. That's considered a pass-by trip. At the driveways, it's 100% of the traffic. There is no credit for that, but on the streets surrounding the site, you may take a credit. So if you look at the difference between what the site is generating today, and if the site was to be developed tomorrow, and it's a virgin site, it's a wooded lot, which it's not, it would add 105 to 145 trips. You apply the credits before and after, and the net difference, in this case, a net increase in site traffic is during the morning peak hour, 28 vehicles. During the weekday afternoon, 36 vehicles, and on a Saturday midday, about 32 vehicles. So in essence, we're not only adding that traffic of 28 to 36 vehicles. We're maintaining the 70 to 100 vehicles that's on the site today or on the adjacent roads today in the background condition. So we're certainly being very conservative. And then we go on to do our analysis in a 2016 condition, 2026 traffic condition. The analyses, and I'm not showing you one of my famous level of service charts, which has all the columns and the numbers. Basically, what happens is the levels of service remain the same. They're all acceptable. There was one concern that the city traffic department had, which was the vehicle queuing on South Main Street northbound. And if it would block the proposed driveway to South Main Street. And that essentially, under average traffic or vehicle queuing conditions, would not block the driveway, but it would block, and you hate to use the word block, but it would reach the driveway with 2 vehicles in the morning peak hour and 1 vehicle during the afternoon peak, and no vehicles blocking that driveway in the Saturday midday peak hour. But that driveway has been moved as far south as we can. It originally was further to the north, closer to the intersection with Monroe Street. It's been moved south. And then we will continue to work with the city as far as addressing that. But as far as that location, we did look and consider moving it to the property line, but there are some issues with that internal to the site itself in the garage. And having a driveway along the property line had some other issues with the adjacent property. And we'll continue to have those discussions with the city as far as how we treat that driveway. But from the results of the analysis, the first step of any traffic study is, what are the impacts? Do we need any mitigation? As Colin mentioned, we will work with the city as far as the on-street parking. We will remove parking meters and have a pay station at some point. We're providing a loading space, which I believe was discussed by some staff at some point, and that's on South Main Street. We'll have bump outs, if you will, on South Main for the driveway itself to kind of protect the pedestrian and create a visual approach to South Main Street itself. There'll be other treatment that'll be discussed by Eric, and I won't go into those because I do traffic. But we'll be looking at parking on the street and working with the city and looking at pavement markings and lane arrangement on Monroe Street as part of this whole package. There was a request by the city traffic department more recently to add the weekday midday peak hour as far as the traffic analyses, which means we recently did some traffic counts for those intersections again. And then we added several intersections, mainly to the south along Chestnut Street and South Main Street, at Merritt Street and Henry Street and so on. And the reason for that and the expansion of this traffic study, which is separate from this application, but to really help the city and address what the city is considering, which is converting Chestnut Street along the site frontage from Monroe to Henry to a permanent southbound one-way street. As you know, it's two-way today, but it's one-way during certain time periods as it relates to school activity along Chestnut Street itself. So there's a separate study that the applicant's committed to do, separate of this analysis. So if the city decides in the future to convert Chestnut Street to a one-way street, the city will have that analysis provided to them. As part of that study, it will include the weekday midday peak hour, if you will. It'll include the conversion of Chestnut Street to one-way southbound all the time, not just during certain time periods. And the team will continue to look at on-street parking on Chestnut Street when it becomes a one-way street as opposed to a two-way street, which it is today. At that time, I believe we'll be adding some other potential development on Chestnut Street in the background to kind of cover the whole thing and provide that information to the city itself. After we hopefully receive approval from the city, we will start the review process with OSTA and Connecticut DOT, since this is considered a major traffic generator, just like one Chestnut Street was. And we will submit those documents, which is mainly a traffic report, site plan, and so on, to the state agencies and go through that process. But that will not include the one-way street of Chestnut Street, because that's not part of this application at this point in time, but it's certainly a traffic study that we will prepare for the city and for the city's use. That summarizes the traffic. A lot's gone into it. There's been a continuing dialogue with the traffic department and the traffic staff on a almost, I wouldn't say daily basis, but every few days, certainly. They've been very helpful. They've provided some comments and suggestions. And one last thing, which I didn't mention, is one of the comments from the, I'll call it my May report. We had all commercial traffic in the garage, going into the garage from South Main Street. and all residential traffic using Chestnut Street. Based on the city's review, I'll call it the May report, we call it the second report in the office. There was a suggestion to have all site traffic use either driveway, so there's an option to do access from Chestnut or South Main Street. So the third report, and the city traffic department has agreed to that. The third report will also include that in its modeling, which will change traffic patterns slightly. And of course, we'll go through the entire process again with levels of service, vehicle queuing, and determine if any mitigation is necessary, such as changing the timing of a traffic signal at Monroe and South Main Street. So that's a summary. We also included accident analyses in the report. I didn't touch on that, but that's certainly included in the document, as we always would. And then we're here, of course, to answer questions tonight or another night and continue working with the city police department and other departments within the city of Hull as we move forward. Thank you.
Can I just, quick question. Are there any changes of service with this?
No, there are not. I believe I touched on that, but we maintain acceptable levels of service from anywhere from B to D, and we don't change any levels of service, and that's important. But there's certainly room in here if we did have an additional impact, and you went from a B to a C. That's certainly acceptable in the eyes of DOT and certainly the city. But no, we don't change levels of service, and I don't anticipate that we'll be changing anything in the future traffic report, traffic analysis.
Okay, Vince, I think that goes to you.
Sounds good. Good evening, Vincent Hines, a licensed engineer with Redness and Mead, offices in Stamford and Wilton. Our office has been providing engineering and zoning consultant services for the development. And as Matt noted earlier, we've actually, as of this afternoon, received WPCA and DPW engineering sign off conditioned for if you were to approve the project. With that, I'll start briefly with the streetscape. I think we've touched upon it a couple times now, but we're going to do the city standard streetscape, which is concrete sidewalk and brick paver banding. And of course, the city standard reinforced concrete drive entrances. On South Main specifically, we've really along the whole building frontage of the site, we're doing building mounted lights, which we have a photometric plan for. And that's in part, like we've discussed, to help provide the most unobstructed sidewalk width that we can along the street frontage. And with that, we're also going to remove the parking meters that are existing along the South Main Street on-street parking in lieu of a single pay station that we will coordinate with the TMP for the repositioned parking, which in part has been repositioned for the bump out at the garage entrance, and in part to provide the quasi loading space for garbage pickup and whatnot. Moving to the utilities, the team has been in discussion with all the various utility companies, and right now everybody has indicated they have adequate supply for the development. Water, gas, and electric utilities are serviced from the Monroe Street infrastructure. The sanitary sewer is connected down through the garage entrance out onto South Main Street. And as discussed, that was approved by the WPCA. And then for stormwater management, there's a single dry well on the site in current conditions, which catches a minimal area. Other than that, there's no formal drainage infrastructure. So as part of this project, we are, and in conjunction with the city's stormwater manual, we're collecting the stormwater runoff to treat the water quality volume but also two, to control the peak rates of runoff off of the site, so that we're not overburdening any of the existing city infrastructure within the surrounding streets. And then where applicable, it's worth noting, where applicable, any of the existing utilities that are being removed from any of the existing buildings will be removed in accordance with the local utility company and their requirements. And with that, I can take questions, if any related to the utilities or the site design.
About some of the green infrastructure pieces, or?
So we have, yeah, so we have 3 stormwater infiltration systems, which, as I discussed, will, those are going to capture the water quality volume of the site. And to add on to that, there is planted kind of synthetic turf areas within the grid system of the courtyard, and additional green kind of roof trays, quasi planters within the pool courtyard as well, for some additional green area.
Vincent, excuse me for just a minute. Again, whoever is having that background noise, can you please mute yourself? Thank you. Vincent, go ahead. I apologize for that.
No problem. And then, as discussed before, I know Matt and his team are, they're going to go into this with enough thought, and so as they can add solar if it ends up being desired. And we have, I believe, 8 electrical vehicle stations right now.
Yeah, so in addition to that, the building will be completely, have a complete continuous exterior insulation. And most of the light fixtures, probably most, if not all, except for some maybe decorative fixtures in the amenity area based on the interior design, will be LED. And just from experience with the same design team and same type of product in other districts, generally meet or exceed the energy code and qualify for utility incentives. SNU doesn't, I don't think, have similar incentives as Eversource, but we'll have that conversation.
Okay, I think that goes to Eric. If we're done with Vince. Going once, going twice. Eric, you're up.
Trying to figure out where my video went. Oh, so you put that up. I thought I did that. So the courtyard, as Colin and Matt had said earlier, is, you know, it's obviously optimal focus and optimal location for the project. And the way that it's been approached in the scheme is to have it from a pedestrian perspective, be as permeable as possible. So in dialogue with the peer review, and then within the team, and then within the city, the ways that we're accomplishing that is to really not have any intermediary height plant material, except for along the outer edge of the steel structure at Monroe. This drawing shows a planting bed, and Colin, the rendering shows it pretty well too, but this drawing shows a planting bed along that edge of something that could be like a Calamagrostis grass, which there's an image of that in the package. But for the most part, everything else is clear trunk trees that would form those two sort of bosque areas on either side of the center, that have a walking surface all the way around the base of them up to the trunk. And again, there's another image of that in the image in the packet that you have. So by using that kind, it's the next one, yeah, there. The bottom left is the turf system that goes all the way up to the base of the tree. So basically the tree's planted through it. So it gives the most flexibility of how to use the spaces around the tree. And this could be for furniture that's either that's more movable, or it's furniture that would be intended to more to stay in place. We do show furniture on this plan under those trees, as well as underneath some the 2 umbrellas in the center. The 6 umbrellas, or 3 umbrellas on each side, would be more dedicated to the cafes or the bakery. But the goal for the furniture would be to provide as many options of seating as possible, closer to the building and under the portion of the building closest. We're representing a sofa and some club chairs, and then out under those 2 umbrellas potentially could be more club chairs. But then under the trees could be something that's more like cafe tables, where if somebody wanted to have a group of 4 or 5, they could pull another chair over, or just 1 or 2, then they could, then other people could have that furniture. So from a pedestrian perspective, we've built into this the greatest degree of flexibility on a non-event basis, which is what this image shows. And the areas that are not under the trees, our intention, Colin, if you go back to that image page that had the paving, within the grid, go back one, yeah, there. We plan to use a paver similar to the one in the image there on the left, which is a larger module paver. And the intention right now is to use it in a very similar pattern as that image, which is a herringbone pattern. And the reason for that is because herringbone is a much stronger pattern, taking into account the turning movements of vehicles that would be coming in and out on either side of the courtyard. Our intention is to have those slight variations in the color of the paver, so that it's not all a homogeneous tone. But it is, the intention is to use a paver that's a larger module like that image shows. So Colin, if you go back to the page, then as was mentioned earlier, from a vehicular perspective, when you turn off of Monroe, the portion where people would drive would be delineated by bollards, so that a driver can see clearly where the drive path is, leading up to the steel posts of the structure in the center, which also has bollards in front of it, just so that there's a continuation of the same material to carry the eye of the driver through the space, and then also to help protect the columns. And then as you exit, there are more of the bollards on the way out. Across the front, closer to Monroe, there's also bollards on either side of the structure, so that people understand that that's more of a non-vehicular zone, since this is basically a 2-lane pickup, drop off, or drive through. So as the graphic shows there, a car could be loading closer to the building, and another car could be waiting on the other side. So we tried to build into it as much flexibility for both pedestrians and the very intuitive layout for the vehicles and the drivers. The next page is one that is more of like an event. So utilizing bollards in a non-event, if you see the bollards that block off the drive, in a non-event, those bollards, we're calling them retractable bollards. They're not mechanical, but they're retractable, so that they could be lowered for the non-event use of the space. But during an event, we want to prohibit cars from turning off of Monroe Street. So those bollards would be raised and locked into place, so that the entire courtyard could be dedicated to pedestrian use. This exhibit shows, a couple of food trucks, some additional furniture with umbrellas. It actually even shows a stage underneath in the center there, should there ever be things like entertainment. But again, trying to demonstrate the kind and the degree of flexibility that the design has wound up being able to accommodate. And whether it's an event scenario or a non-event scenario, the two spaces out adjacent to the cafe or the bakery are unaffected. So their operations wouldn't change necessarily whether there's an event or not. Closer to the building, at the base of the building, there's circulation for people to move from both Chestnut and South Main over toward the courtyard and into the courtyard and up to and into the main lobby of the building. And that's generally the courtyard that you could see from the layout
Eric.
column. Yes.
Question about, is the courtyard a covered space?
It's not covered. However, the two spaces outside the cafe or the bakery on either side, they do have a canopy that would be put among, within the structure. So it is covered more from shade, from light, but for light, not to make it all weather.
I'm thinking, if you can go back to that picture of that entrance area, I'm thinking during the winter months, the possibility of that it's still a relatively small area. I'd be a little bit concerned about buildup of snow or ice, cars coming into that space and spinning out. And damaging either the building or injuring people
One
in
of the
the area.
Yes, Mr. Schulman, one of the advantages, the paver that we're showing is designed to be used in vehicular applications, and because of that, it from a maintenance perspective is something that the surface of it is smooth enough so that it could be plowed very easily and maintained. And then the zones that would be outside the vehicular portion of the drive from a snow perspective, they're very easily plowed, even with a piece of machinery. So the obstacles within the space are very far apart, so that if Spinnaker or the management, the maintenance staff wanted to maintain this with even a ride-along piece of equipment, like it's a ride-along snowblower, they could do that. So the maintenance would be as easy as possible.
Thank you.
I think also, just to build on that a little bit, the expectation is that you're dealing with very slow moving vehicles in this space, and the part of the design of the courtyard is to inherently control that through the design of the space and making it more pedestrian than vehicular in nature, so that you're already not accelerating fast or coming in a way that's going to lead you to be out of control. So I think, Eric's points are very good about the maintenance and the durability and the serviceability of the space. But I think the overall design, we've taken care to try and address the people first nature of the space and the vehicle second, and that hopefully, based on what we're learning about urban practices and street design from New York and other places that are undertaking larger municipal projects like this, will just inherently lower the speed of the vehicles and create awareness. And we also have the bollard protection in place to protect the building as well as the pedestrians. Should there be an unfortunate incident, it's going to have to get through several bollards and some trees and some steel structures. And as far as covering goes, we do have the shade structures there, which may be retracted, to your point, in the inclement weather, but this portion of the building is underneath an overhang, so it will be somewhat protected from snow, and that was shown in the detail slide of that overhang, where you can see there's these are the steel legs that come down, and the furnishing is seen as being in this area in front of the main lobby amenity space. So there's a generous projection of probably 10 to 12 feet out from the building that is covered and able to be furnished. So you can wait there for your friend or an Uber and be protected from the elements while still being outside.
Thank you.
Are the pavers permeable?
They are not permeable. Vincent could speak to the drainage system further, but these pavers, they're not permeable. I mean, well, the nature of pavers is some degree of permeability. It's not sealed, but they're not a water storage system.
And then why do turf instead of natural grass for the tree areas?
Well, we're hoping there's a lot of wear and tear, and the turf will hold up. If you imagine, like a sports field that gets a lot of wear and tear, the turf takes a beating, and it requires rest and recovery. So in this case, we're wanting to use that material so that it can withstand that better.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I believe that concludes the team presentation of the consultants, and we're open for questions should there be any on the material presented. And that's it for us.
Are there any additional questions right now from the commission members?
Are they going to be planted any street trees on Monroe or South Main or Chestnut?
We've been asked to eliminate obstacles on the South Main and Chestnut side. We do have plant material on the Chestnut side that is closer to the building, but there are, and then on Monroe we have additional lamp posts. But at this point, all the tree plantings are happening within the courtyard, and then the shrub and ground cover plantings are happening on Chestnut.
Anything else before we open this up to the public? All right, if not, Brian, would you explain how people who want to testify can do so?
Sure. So if you are a member of the public and you'd like to speak on this application, you could use the raise your hand feature, which is at the bottom of your screen if you're hovering over everybody's faces. And if you're dialed in on a phone, you could hit *9 and that will raise your hand.
We ask that when you speak, please provide your name and your address.
Not seeing anybody, Lou.
And let's give it another minute or so.
Sure. So it's just the raise your hand feature. You'll see it at the bottom of your screen. It's a little hand icon. Just click on that. And for the one person dialed in on a phone, you hit *9 if you're looking to speak on this one. Nobody, Lou.
Okay. I'm going to ask Steve just to before we come back to Spinnaker, ask Steve to just go over what's next.
Sure, and I apologize. I was at a planning committee meeting at the start of your meeting, so I don't know if this was mentioned at the beginning or not. As you know, we do have our third-party peer review consultant, Bob Griswatz from DeColor & Dahl, who has been reviewing the application and meeting with city staff as well as redevelopment staff, and also has conversations with the applicant's team as well. He's in the process of finalizing his report, We expect that in the next week or so. So we need to get that item in the record. So the public hearing needs to remain open. The redevelopment agency is also going to be looking at this item prior to your next meeting. So hopefully we'll have a report from them, a positive report from them. So at that meeting, you can hear from Bob if you'd like. Get any of the outstanding items or questions that you raised tonight addressed by the applicant's team, and then get Bob's report and the redevelopment report, and then you can take action at your next meeting. Unfortunately, I don't remember what the date is, but I think it's like the 22nd or 23rd of June.
23rd.
23rd. Yep. So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay. Again, before we go back to Mr. Edwardson, Brian, no one from the public here that wishes to speak?
No, sir.
Okay, then Mr. Edwardson, if you want to just finish up.
Sure. So we appreciate your time today. We will hopefully continue this dialogue on the 23rd and can provide more feedback specifically on our neighborhood outreach. I would point out that I mentioned we met with the Mutual Housing Board. There are some prominent community members on that board, including a council member, a local reverend, and the president of the NAACP local chapter Norwalk. But we'll follow up back with them and any others, Steve, that you might suggest and give you the feedback on that at the next meeting.
Okay. And with that, we'll hold this hearing open, and we'll hopefully conclude it at the next meeting of the Zoning Commission. Thank you and your team for the presentation.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Give them a minute or so, if you will, to clear out, and we'll move on the agenda. Okay, next on the agenda is the review and action on new applications. The first being 2021-16 R/SP 132 Flax Hill LLC, 132 Flax Hill Road, proposed building zone regulation text amendment to reduce the minimum lot size requirement for historic incentive developments in conjunction with a 5-unit historic incentive development. This is our preliminary review.
You ready for me, Lou? Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman? Okay.
Sure.
All right. Good evening. Adam Blank. I'm the attorney for Workforce Partners and 132 Flax Hill LLC, the owner of the property. This is, I can share my screen. Give it this. Has it pulled up for you?
It says you're screen sharing, but we can't see any detail.
I think it'll
Oh,
probably
black.
should come up in a second. Are we good now?
Nope, still, there we go.
Okay, great. So again, Adam Blank of for Workforce Partners, 132 Flax Hill LLC. The property is 132 Flax Hill Road. It's just under a 1/4 acre parcel located in the D residential zone. And the property is currently listed on the local historic resources inventory. As you can see here, this is us at 132. You've got Washington Street here, the big lot, MLK here on Clay. You all know those stairs that come down, and then the South Norwalk train station is just right here. So Workforce Partners owns 132. It is it's got an existing 3-family home on the property, or 3-unit home on the property. What we'd like to do is to renovate the interior. It's really an interior renovation job, but it's to redo the inside of the property and to bring it from 3 units to 5 units. There would also be some rehabbing of the exterior of the structure, but we're not adding square footage. It's not adding a new building. It's not a big project. It's simply redefining the interior space to add 2 additional units, which would also result in some changes to the parking and to the access drives for that property. There's a text change amendment in front of you, as well as a special permit application. I'll take just a couple of minutes to go through the text amendment and then the special permit application. This is just your first review. We have Mark Hopper, who's the project architect. He'll describe for you some of the architecturals on the project, as well as Ricardo Sabellos, the project engineer, will also speak with you briefly tonight. Under the existing regulations in the D residential zone, certain of your requirements can be waived or modified to encourage the preservation of historic structures. As I mentioned, this home is on the historic inventory, but under the existing regulations, that only houses or only structures that are on larger parcels within the D zone can take advantage of that existing regulation. And so we came in, and right now it applies for 12,000 square foot lots or larger, which is really just a couple of properties in the D zone. We proposed a text amendment to reduce that minimum lot size requirement from 12,000 down to 9,000 square feet, which would make this parcel qualify for relief under the historic regulation. We got some feedback from your staff after the application was filed, encouraging us to amend the proposed text change to entirely eliminate the minimum lot size requirement, so that all properties, all historic structures within the D zone could make use of the historic preservation regulation. We have now amended our application to so state that we're seeking elimination of that minimum lot size in its entirety. We put together with some assistance from your staff an inventory, which is in your packet, of the parcels that are historic structures that they're on lots of 12,000 square feet or less in the D zone. I'm just going to quickly scroll through. You'll see some of them are fairly nice. Some of them surprise me that they're on the inventory, but there are some, I think, certainly some structures worthy of preservation in this class. And I believe that we're talking really only about 34 properties within the D zone that are on a historic inventory and are less than 12,000 square foot lots that this proposed text amendment would apply to. And I know that you recently on East Wall Street approved a similar text amendment, and actually I believe it was Commissioner Roina, I may be mistaken, who had commented, and some of the public had commented about a dislike for that amendment because it only applied to just a couple of properties within that zone, and that it might make sense to broaden the scope for that. And so I think this, although we're in a different zone here, this does accomplish some of that goal to sort of encourage historic preservation irrespective of the size of the lot that parcel is on. So that's in a nutshell, that's the text change that's in front of you. There's before I get into the special permit application, Workforce Partners, that name may ring a bell to you. They own quite a number of properties in Norwalk. Their sort of niche is usually housing stock that is not workforce in the deed restricted, 10% criteria that you're used to, but properties that fill that gap between those deed restricted units and market rate units, or the more luxury units. Typically, their tenants are earning 60 to 100% of the average area median income. And within the last year or so, they've filed at Elmcrest Terrace. This was a historic preservation application that came in front of you that you approved, I think within the last month or so. And then a little bit further back, but probably within the past year, was at 204 Flax Hill Road. Again, a historic preservation of another Workforce Partners property for a rehab that you folks approved as well. As I mentioned, on this particular property, there's an existing 3,000 square foot 3-unit multifamily structure. Again, we're going to reconfigure that, make that 5 units. There'll be the access will change to the site with a shared entrance between 138 Flax and 132, with new parking put in. You'll hear, I'll let Mark Hopper talk about the architecture, and again, Ricardo will talk a little more about the drainage. But the applicant does own 138 Flax Hill as well. It's shown on this zoning location survey and some of the documents you've been provided. There's no application in front of you specific to 138 Flax Hill. It's sort of for illustrative purposes only. But I will say that if we are approved for this project at 132 Flax Hill, we would then be filing an application at 138 Flax Hill simply to reconfigure their parking lot. It's in discussions with staff, it's anticipated that that would be essentially an over-the-counter permit and wouldn't come in front of you. But there will be a shared drive for both properties. We'll be creating some additional pavement or impervious surface compared to what's existing at 132. On the other hand, we're going to be reducing the impervious surface and creating some additional green space at 138 based upon this reconfiguration. This is a special permit application because if you grant the text amendment, then we would be seeking some waivers or reductions of some of your requirements through the historic preservation regulation, and I'll just touch on those for a minute. The lot width, there's a minimum lot width in the D zone. We don't currently meet that, and we're not looking to change the lot size, but we're just going to continue to keep this existing lot that's non-conforming in width. And so that's one waiver. A second is you require 200 square feet of recreation area per unit. On this application, we come in at about 154 square feet of recreation area per unit, which leaves us on this site as a whole about 231 square feet short. Again, there'll be additional area will be created on 138. I mean, technically that's not a part of this, but and there are green space in addition to the recreational area on 132, but the additional green space doesn't count under your regs as recreational area. So we are looking for a waiver for that. There's on these 3 sides of the property, your regs require a 5-foot buffer. Here where there's a shared drive, there will be no buffer. On the back, we're seeking a waiver of that 5 feet as well, although we may in fact meet the 5-foot buffer criteria. It's very, very close. So to be safe and not have to have any issues, we've asked for the waiver on the back, and we may or may not meet that. But we also, where this exit drive is here, we need the waiver as well for that buffer. So it's a waiver of the 5-foot buffer. And the final waiver is that for 5 units, your regs would require 7 parking spaces. I think it's 6.5, but you round up to 7. And so we want you to round down to 6. So we were asking for 6 spaces instead of 7. And again, there is on-street parking. It doesn't count towards our parking requirements, but there is additional spaces for parking right here on Flax Hill. In a nutshell, those are essentially the 2 applications before you. We do have a landscaping plan that's in your file. We're not going to go through that tonight, or we don't plan to go through that tonight. If there are questions about it tonight, we can address those and talk more detail about it at a later public hearing. There's a traffic impact analysis, again, that Mike Galante has performed with the 2, I'm sorry, it was not Mike Galante, but we do have a traffic impact analysis with the 2 additional units. We didn't have the traffic engineer here this evening, but you may hear from him at the public hearing, and the report is in your file. We have sign-offs from actually every SEAC department, an agency other than Department of Public Works. We've had some back and forth with them, and we're just waiting on their final sign-off currently. Before I turn it over to Mark Hopper and Ricardo Ceballos, the sort of asks of you folks this evening from us are, 1, that you refer us to the Planning Commission on the text change. 2, that you refer us to the Historic Commission on the text change as well, which I believe is required. And the Historic Commission, I should note, they considered the text change from 12,000 feet to 9,000 feet and unanimously supported that. We envision that they will similarly unanimously support eliminating it entirely, but we think that should go back to them because it's a sort of a significant change from what they previously saw. Additionally, in that review, as part of the historic preservation reg, they would review the site, the special permit application, and hopefully have a favorable recommendation to you on our special permit application. And at that point, we would come back for a public hearing, which this application requires. Unless there's questions for me, I'll let Mr. Hopper take over.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commission members. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. As Attorney Blank indicated, this is a interior building conversion from 3 units to 5 units. What we show here are floor plans where we show the existing floor plan at the top of the page. First, second, and third, which is comprised of first floor is a single 3-bedroom unit. Second floor is a 2-bedroom unit. And the third floor is an additional 2-bedroom unit. Our planned alterations are to increase the unit count from 3 to 5. And by doing that, we are providing 2 1-bedroom units on the first floor and 2 1-bedroom units on the second floor. And the unit on the third floor will remain as it currently exists. When we undertake this project, it will utilize the 2015 International Existing Building Code, and it'll be classified as a level 3 alteration since we will be disturbing more than 50% of the building area. And with that in the code, since we will now be above 4 units, we will have to provide handicap accessible units to the first floor. And a feature of that obviously is the creation of a ramp to get into the 1-bedroom unit at the front of the building, and the provision of a handicap lift at the rear of the building to be able to access the 1-bedroom unit to the rear. These are important features and features that are code compliant. Also, as part of this project, we will be fully sprinklering the building. which will allow us the opportunity to eliminate the existing fire escape that comes from one of the bedrooms from the 3rd floor. So we'll be able to eliminate that, which we think is an improvement to the exterior of the building. From an exterior standpoint, as was mentioned, the building is on the historic registry. It's a Queen Anne style American residence, which features symmetrical cross gables, steeply pitched roofs, front porch, as well as some other detailing and features, brackets at the gable ends. Those will all remain. The existing front porch will be replaced as part of the new work for the ramp. The porch will be detailed in accordance with Queen Anne style detailing. Front porches are very much an important aspect of the building style, and we've picked up using details of the period, which will enhance the historic nature of the property. We've also as part of this, we'll be realigning the front steps to align with the front door. Currently, the stairs are off center, so we're moving the stairs in what would be the kind of the historic arrangement for a house of this type. As you see on this south elevation on the side, we've got the red dotted line here that shows where the existing fire escape currently is located. That will be removed. And then on the east and north elevation, we're showing how the rear porch is expanded and a handicap lift is incorporated into the site. The site is relatively flat, so there really aren't any significant grade changes. As you can see in our documentation here, we show general building dimensions, heights, and we're in full compliance with the zoning regulations there. Finally, materials. The existing building is sheathed in Dutch lap siding. We will be maintaining the siding, maintaining the shutters. Our main focus is at the front of the building where the new porch is. Obviously, the realignment of the front stairs and then wrapping around of the handicap accessible ramp, which goes down the side of the property. We did have an opportunity to share our design thoughts with the Historical Commission, and based upon their feedback, we changed the location of the ramp. So your package did show a revision of our from our original thoughts. So that's we think that's an important feature as well that enhances the historic character and nature of the building. There will be new plantings at along the front of the building, which again will utilize and screen some of the front porch and the ramp to the side. And we've also gone to a historic color palette, which would be reminiscent of the Queen Anne style type of building. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Caraballas.
All right, good evening. This is, as Adam mentioned, it is a small property. It's less than 1/4 of an acre. I'm gonna share with you just what we see from the street. I don't know if you guys can see it right there.
We can
Can
see
I-
it.
You can? So as it was mentioned, we're going to have an entrance driveway that is shared with 138 Flax Hill. This driveway here, it's going to be reduced in size. We're going to decrease the impervious area for about 441 square feet is going to be reduced. This whole area is going to become green space, and the driveway again is going to be shared with 132. The area in the back is where the parking is proposed, as you saw on the previous plan. And the exit driveway for both properties will be an improved version of this driveway. The concrete aprons will, the proposed plans call for city standards. And as you saw on the plan, the stormwater management system will take care of all these new additional bituminous driveway and parking spaces that are going to be in the back of the property. The effective area that's draining to the back of the property based on the grading that we're proposing, it's going to take care of all these ramps, all the roof leaders in the building, the parking spaces, driveway areas. Catch basin will be located here near the space number 1. The stormwater management system, it's going to be a standard Coltech 330 XL. It's going to provide about 420 it's 420 cubic feet of volume storage. This stormwater management system has been designed to meet City of Norwalk's criteria, and it will handle all storms from the 1-year storm to the 100-year storm without increasing runoff volume and peak runoff, peak storm runoff.
Adam, this is beginning to sound more like a public hearing presentation. There's
Too many technical details.
The level of detail here we don't need to hear.
That sounds good.
Not this evening.
Yeah, and I think if I mean, unless Ricardo, unless you have other questions for Ricardo on drainage, I think that's about all that we have tonight. Kevin Moses, I should mention, the developer, is here with us, and if you had questions for him, he can answer that. Otherwise, that's the extent of our presentation.
Okay, thank you. Commission members have questions?
The only question I have, and Adam, I don't know if this is something you can answer, or, I mean, you're asking us to lessen the required parking, I think by 1 space, if I'm not mistaken. I guess, I mean, I know that we have, I'm sorry?
You're correct.
Yeah. My question is, and maybe this is more of a thought than of a question, but, you know, there seem to be minimum parking requirements that vary across the city. You know, where do you see this fitting in? Why should we, you know, consider reducing it, and for this one application, just as one application, or do you think that, you know, we should be looking at a bigger change here?
Well, so first of all, I mean, I would say that, yes, officially it is a 1 space reduction, but when you do the math out, we would be required to do 6.5, which you would round up, and we're saying do it 6. So it's, yeah, I mean, it's not a huge ask. I do think that no matter what parking needs actually are, that that providing incentives, and this is essentially a financial incentive, right? I mean, by having less parking, that's a benefit to the developer. But by doing that, you do really encourage historic preservation. I'm not sure. Leave it to, you know, your consultants, and if you do the zoning rewrite, on whether 1 space per unit is appropriate sort of citywide as the quote right number. But I think when it comes to historic preservation, your number can be the wrong number. It can be too little, but it can be too little in order to encourage that preservation. Because if you don't offer anything, why would anybody want to preserve it rather than just tearing it down and building what they could otherwise build as of right? So I don't know if that actually answers your question, Mr. Goldstein, but if not, I'll try again, but.
No, it did. This is something that it just piqued my interest. So something to think about.
Go ahead.
I would just also just say, and I know that it's sort of being looked at. I mean, I think anything you can do to encourage historic preservation, but creating a sort of a carrot with a stick, not just a stick, is a positive. And I would encourage, if it's feasible, and it may not be feasible, but down the road to look to a transfer of development rights so that you're sort of preserving the historic property as it exists. And in exchange for it losing density and other things it could take advantage of, that owner could either sell that to another developer on another site, or for themselves could build something elsewhere that exceeds your regulations because of their sort of true preservation of a historic structure.
My take on this is a little bit different. The other commission members may not agree with me. I think, number one, this is not a particularly distinguished building. The ones that we have looked at before and that we've approved have been significant historic buildings. In addition, this is really, at least in my view, this is historic preservation light. It's not being returned to what it was. It's being returned to Queen Anne style, not the original style of necessarily of the original building. And I'm concerned about that. That really represents, at least in my view, a fairly significant watering down of the reason we have these regulations. Number two, we're being asked to give an awful lot of incentives. Lot width, recreation space, buffer in front, buffer in back, or side buffer and buffer in back, and parking spaces. At least in my view, I'm not sure that this project and this building, well, the project as it's envisioned and the building as it exists is really worthy of that much consideration.
Can I'll just briefly respond. So I don't disagree with the premise that other projects you've seen have called for a larger scale of, I'll say, historic preservation. But and Kevin can probably speak on it. The projects like the East Wall Street project, or your staff could tell you, how many units were they adding on to that one structure? They're preserving one structure and adding 20 units. We're not doing that. This is a much smaller development. And I know you're saying that we're asking for a lot. Just to be clear here, the existing lot doesn't have the 5-foot buffer. That's pre-existing non-conforming. The lot width is pre-existing non-conforming, and we're allowed 5 units. We're not asking for a single unit more than what you're allowed in the D zone. We're not asking for any of that. All that I view that we're asking for is let us keep our non-conforming status and reduce our parking requirement by a half of a space. Everything else is staying the same. It's not, we're not making it worse. We're not getting rid of a buffer. We're leaving that all as is. And we're adding ADA compliance. We're sprinklering the whole building. And so yes, is this $1 million rehab of the house? It's not, on the exterior, it's not. But we're not, no one would do that. We would just tear it down because it just the numbers don't justify it. And it is on the local historic inventory. And so, they don't have to accept it if they don't want the property on it. So I would hope you to at least keep an open mind about the work that we're putting into the project, commensurate with the sort of ask of you to lessen your requirement.
I think one of the other things that's a little bit concerning is although you're getting 2 additional units, we're losing a 3-bedroom unit on that first floor. Am I right about that? That right now that first floor unit is 3 bedrooms. That's something that's very desirable in workforce housing, and there aren't a lot of them. So we're losing that as well.
And if I could just pop in for a moment, Mr. Schulman, and I do appreciate all of your comments. And I think Adam responded to those very well. And just to piggyback on that, the 2 structures, 1 Elmcrest and 204 Flax, which we've brought into you in the past, you're absolutely right. Those are different buildings. They have far more panache, much more historical provenance for the city of Norwalk. And as you can see in the packet that you received from us of the properties under 12,000 square feet, there's many properties on that list that do not have that level of panache. They're somewhat regular buildings. And there were many historic properties of that cloth, and 132 is one of them. It's not necessarily a standout property, and I can't say that it ever was, but it is a Queen Anne and it is historic. And the biggest piece that's missing as far as recreating its historic street frontage is the porch. And that's where we've focused our efforts. And I think that the Historical Commission would also support the fact that that porch is one of the most critical elements to be reinstated. And to Adam's point, by right, we are allowed 5 units at the property. Our biggest hurdle there is the lot width, which was really where this whole process started and why we're coming in front of you.
Any other comments from commission members?
Actually, Mr. Schulman, just one other quick point, if I might add one other thing, and this could vary with other property owners within the city of Norwalk, but I can say most definitely that within our portfolio, and however many units that might be in Norwalk, north of 300-ish, our 3 bedrooms actually have the lowest rental demand. 1s and 2s, particularly 2s, are very hot right now during the pandemic, but even pre-pandemic, we've had the most difficulty leasing our 3 bedrooms as compared to the 1s and 2s. Now that's just what we see, and I can't speak to other owners, but I can certainly tell you that within our own portfolio, 3s are typically the least desirable.
I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
And the only other comment I'd make, and this I'm not sure this goes to the presentation because it's something that even our staff seems to support, and that is the elimination of size requirements for the properties on which these historic buildings reside, if you will. My preference, frankly, would be to keep a size requirement, but again, that's my own personal view on this.
And to be clear, Mr. Schulman, we defer to you guys on that. We clearly came to the text amendment where we are today purely by the advisement of the zoning staff.
Right. Steve, any comments on this?
Yeah, I'll just comment on that last point, and if Michelle wants to piggyback on anything, please jump in. I think it was staff's recommendation to drop the square footage requirement altogether. You may recall when we first looked at this probably 18 months ago with the 3 Elmcrest property, it was the first time this was really looked at outside of some historic preservation elements in, like you just looked at in South Norwalk or in the Wall Street, West Ave area. So we decided, it's probably better to have a cap on it and take it slowly. And then, we've seen a few other projects like the applicant's prior Flax Hill project, and then what you just approved recently on East Wall Street, which I think were received rather favorably. Our view was that dropping the square footage down just to enable select a few other properties be eligible for the amendment as well didn't seem to make sense to us. And just, speaking for myself, if you're going to go that route of historic preservation, then, it should be open to any eligible properties that meet that criteria. But I think your point is well taken about whether building A is, just because something's old doesn't necessarily mean it's a nice building. So I think that's kind of where the rub lies sometimes with the historic preservation argument.
All right, other comments from commission members? Notably silent. I would welcome a motion on this matter.
Just so you're clear, it still has to get referred to planning commission and come back for public hearing at a
Understood.
later date.
So what we're looking at is a motion to refer this out to the Planning Commission and the Historic Commission.
Okay,
I'll move that.
Okay, so Rod moves. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Galen seconds. Any further comments? All right, if not, all those in favor?
Aye.
I'm sorry, let's, this is a formal action. Steve, let's do a roll call.
Sure. Mr. Witherspoon,
Yes.
Mr. Goldstein,
Yes.
Ms. Wells,
Yes,
Mr. Cantor,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
and Mr. Schulman.
No. Motion passes. We will pass this on now to the other two commissions for action, at which point I presume it'll come back to us for final action. Thank you. Thank you, Attorney Blank and the other members of your team.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you all.
All right, next item on the agenda, 2021-17 SP, FRAP LLC, 40 Fulham Road, proposed 40-unit elderly housing development, preliminary review, a brief preliminary review. Attorney Blank, you represent FRAP?
Yes, sir. And I promise that we will be brief, as long as you promise to be nice.
I'm always nice, whether I agree or disagree.
So again, Adam Blank for FRAP LLC, the owner of. Let me just get this up. And let me know when it loads, tends to delay.
We've got it.
Okay, great. So FRAP is the owner of a little over 7 acres of property on Fullen Road. This is your first review. This is a vacant parcel here with an abandoned or an old parking lot in the bulk of the site. Fullen Road is in here, which is the only place that we have access to our site. By sort of background, Pepperidge Farm is here in front of us. And then this is that fairly new and fairly massive apartment complex there that comes up onto Westport Avenue. This is the Westport town line. On the Westport side, we have a condominium development here. This is Norwalk, another condominium development that abuts us. And then There's a couple of single-family homes here that abut us, but that's essentially our neighborhood. We have in front of you a special permit application to build 40 units of, I'll call it luxury housing for seniors or elders. Your regs call it elderly housing. It's 24 units of, pull this up, 24 units of duplex and 16 units of single family homes, sort of laid out as shown here on the landscape plan. Lenny DeAndrea, the project engineer, will give you just a very brief overview of the project tonight, and Matt Pop, the landscape architect, will talk to you briefly about the landscaping. We do have, this is a FRAP is comprised of Jerry Efron from Gray Rock and Clay Fowler from Spinnaker. I believe they're both on this Zoom and can answer questions that you may have for the developers. You've got a traffic report from Mike Galante, who's not going to speak tonight, a housing analysis from David Herbst, and architectural plans from J.A. Jameson Architects. Some or all of them will present at the public hearing, and we can convey any questions or comments you have to them from tonight's meeting. The units will be handicap accessible, first floor masters. Each unit will have a single car garage, which, by the way, under the regs, the single car garage satisfies all of the parking requirements for the site. But in addition to that single car garage, there will be, I'll call it unofficial parking. You can fit a car in the driveway, which would provide an additional space. That doesn't count as a space under your regs, but it's there. And then on top of that, there are 25 additional at-grade spaces scattered throughout the project. So we have way more than what's required for parking. The architecturals may sort of look familiar to you, and the project may sound familiar to you at 125 Richards. Maybe 6 months ago, maybe less, you approved a similar senior housing project from the same developers. This is a sister development. If you've driven by Richards lately, you can see that that work is well underway there to bring that project to reality. This is essentially the same thing, just a different layout and a different location. We would be providing, we would be offering housekeeping, professional caregiving, meals, supportive services to residents, exterior maintenance of all the dwellings and landscaping. Again, this is a low traffic generating, non-noisy type of use that won't be any burden on the tax payers, will be a significant net benefit without school kids. This use is permitted by special permit. Over 25% of the site is going to be in a conservation area, and well over 50% will be open space and green area. There are wetlands on the site and a water course, wetlands on each side with the water course right in here, which means that this has to get Conservation Commission approval. We're currently in front of the Conservation Commission. And in fact, the Conservation Commission has or is, and maybe Director Kleppen knows or maybe not, whether they've in fact engaged a peer review consultant, but they are in fact engaging a peer review consultant to examine the impacts the project may have on the wetlands and see if there's any alternatives that might work better. So we're going through that process now, and we need Conservation's approval before you can hold a public hearing and act on this application. But we are hoping that, and it sounds like they do intend to act sort of expeditiously, but we don't have that deadline yet. So again, we'll let Lenny DeAndrea and Matt Pop speak briefly, but we're not asking for a public hearing tonight, just for you to allow your staff to hopefully schedule that if and when we get our conservation approval. With that overview, I will let Matt or Lenny first.
Right, I'd like to go
Fight it
first.
out. Sure.
I'd like to turn it over to Matt because he does the pretty things for it. Can you bring it up on the existing conditions, Adam? Or do I need to share and then I'll bring something up?
I should be able to do it.
Yeah, that's probably the best way for me. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, the other
Wait,
way.
I gotta, let me just pull it up then. I don't
Okay.
have it.
So I threw out half my pages because Adam did a great summary. And I'll just tell you some of the unique features about the site and how we went about the overall design. Okay, that's just fine. The site's a little bit deceiving if you were to walk it as I did. I start from Fullen Road and then I work my way down the slope and hit the parking lot at the bottom of the slope. And it drops about 14 feet. But then as you continue across the parking lot, which has some grade to it, it then kind of rises up in the center. And when you get towards the easterly side, keep sliding over, right about there, you're actually at the same elevation as Fullen Road, where we intend to come in. So even though you feel like you're dropping down, and even though we'll have a driveway that comes in from Fullen Road with about a 6 or 7% grade, the site itself is going to be fairly level across it because we're going to try to do some fill management, try to get this as close to a balanced cut and fill site as possible. The asphalt parking lot, as you can see here, is fairly large. It's about 2.16 acres compared to the 7 acres of the site. And there is presently no drainage controls. It sheds off as sheet flow. And then there is a parking lot that continues to the southwest. And so when you look back at historical photographs, this was a much larger parking lot. What we intend to do, of course, is to eliminate that large parking lot area and then redevelop it. So if you can get to probably Matt Pop's plan is just fine. The rendering. Because it looks so much better than mine, you know. So what we did here, the site is pretty well shaped for us, and we were able to do like a stacked loop driveway. It's two-way directional, so you can go in any direction, clockwise or counterclockwise, and one feeds off the other. In the center section, as was mentioned, you have mostly duplexes, and then where you're abutting the wooded areas to the east and to the north, we have some detached. So we've tightened up the site as best we can, but we've maintained the driveways at 22 feet wide because of our parking requirements and back out areas. Each driveway has a full 20-foot long driveway itself, so you get the added luxury of having a car parked in front of your unit as well as in the garage. I talked about trying to balance the site with the earthwork. And it's really an iterative process. We're not there yet. We have too much excess fill. So basically you start, and when you start looking at the basements that may be excavated and the roadways and drainage, right now we probably feel we'll be lifting the site a little bit more because our goal here is to balance it and minimize any unnecessary truck trafficking onto the adjoining roads. The drainage itself, it's just typical. And nowadays, we all have our requirements in each town, and more each town and municipality is getting more and more similar on what we do. We could look at this trade-off as saying, yeah, we're actually going to reduce the impervious areas because that large parking lot is not nearly, is much larger. It's a reduction of 37,500 square feet of asphalt. So there's going to be a reduction when we put in our roadway system, but we will have an increase because we'll put in the roofs. You can also look at it differently too, as we push more and more towards electric vehicles, we'll see less and less of oil drips. The cars are better now anyway. So overall, just by the mere fact that we're turning this into a residential development, it's going to be an improvement over what it used to be, which was just a parking lot. Then we will collect the runoff and do the usual treatment of infiltration of that first flush. We'll then spread out our systems. Right now, we have a kind of a concept design that we're fine tuning as we also fine tune the grading. And then we'll have infiltration systems spread apart. Of course, there'll be catch basins with deep sumps and bell traps. And then ultimately, before we discharge to the western, someone said water course, I think that was Adam, but we look at more as a ditch on this side. It's not the best of water courses until Matt Pop does his remediation enhancement. But that would still be the ultimate discharge point. And of course, it will go through SEAC and be reviewed by the engineering department, and that presently is ongoing. The easterly side of the site, of course, is where all the trees are. We actually get to say, in this case, we're not removing nearly as many trees as if this was a pristine site, consider this has been developed in the past. So yes, there'll be tree removal. And as you can see on this rendering, and what Matt will speak to, is he's going to be bringing back quite a few trees that we're losing in that easterly section. But it's not just the trees, it's the diversity that he's going to be bringing back as well. The other part of the grading that we have to do in a project like this is we have to really focus on these grades, and that's why it's a bit of a process. This is for senior housing, elderly housing, and just like Richards Avenue, which was a bit of a challenge, we need to minimize the driveway slope, minimize the steps into the front door, which is 1, and then minimize that steps from the garage to the first floor. And that's also just 1 as well. So this site will be relatively flat as you move from unit to unit. And our goal is to get it as balanced as possible for a cut and fill site. Unless you have any direct questions, I'd be pleased to turn it over to Matt Pop to talk about the plan.
Have you guys considered solar on all these roofs?
Yeah, and that is one of your requirements, that it has to be considered, and if feasible, it has to be incorporated into the development. I'm not sure how far along they are into the feasibility, but you can expect that should we get an approval, that would be a condition of the approval.
Good evening, Matthew Pop, landscape architect from Environmental Land Solutions here in Norwalk. Adam, did you want me to share my screen, or you want to run through?
If you're comfortable doing it and controlling it, great. Otherwise, I can pull your plan back up.
Yeah, if you could share it with me, that'll be fine.
Sure.
Okay, again, as Lenny was noted, there's 4 distinct habitats on the site. The first one is the wetland area. Oops. Could you guys hear me? Should I double check?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Oops. Let me get back. The first area is the woodland over here by Fulton Road. There's a wooded wetland right through here. The parking lot is approximately through here. There's a drainage swale water course that runs right along the edge of the parking lot, right along this red line, which is the wetland line. So it's right through here. So the second area is that parking area right through here. The third kind of habitat I would say is that wooded upland area through here. And then back here by Westport, we have a wooded wetland here. And I'll just run through some of the kind of the photos that show it. This is a view from Fulton Street looking down towards the parking lot here. You can see there's some dumping of debris matter. Back through here, there's invasive garlic mustard.
Are you guys able to see Matt's screen?
No, we just lost his screen.
You want to try to share your screen once more?
Mm-hmm. How's that? You see it or?
No.
No.
If you see the share screen button at the bottom of the screen?
Yeah, yep.
If you click that, and then it should hopefully pull up a Windows choices.
Did it pull it up? No.
No.
Well, we could take your word for it.
Okay, well, I'll just go, maybe Adam, if you could just bring up that.
Just the regular landscape plan, okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's why I let Adam do it for me.
So starting from Fulton Street, there's a wetland area. It's highly disturbed wetland system, has a lot of litter in it. There's some fill piles. You can see the topography is like uneven, meaning that it's been graded in the past, and lots of invasive species. And then right on the eastern side, the low area where the water course is, there's a lot of invasive species, mainly the porcelainberry. Then we're jumping up to the parking lot area, and then the wooded area, upland area towards Westport, and then there's a wooded wetland over by the Westport line. That's much more natural, maybe a higher quality wetland system because it's still not disturbed. The landscape plan has 2 plant lists. If you could, you're right there up on the top right-hand corner of the sheet. So there's a wetland plant list, which we're using to mitigate the wetlands. And then there's a site plant list, which is the kind of, I would say, the more ornamental trees in the middle of the site. The wetland plantings include, I don't know if you can-
More detail than we need this evening.
Yep. Okay. The main area is we're proposing a wetland creation area to kind of offset the wetland impacts. We're including removing of invasive species, planting of native habitat trees within the wetlands. All in total, we're proposing approximately 132 plants, or trees rather, plus arborvitae, over 100 arborvitae. So we're trying to get that one-to-one removal of trees to replacement of trees. And then just touch on site lighting. We have 8 light poles, so we're trying to keep this dimly lit. And I think we're going to reduce that further, mainly just keeping a light pole by each parking area. And I think there's like 5 parking areas. So that's it, like quickly. Again, we're right before wetlands, and we're hoping to get this approved, in the future.
How many mature trees are you taking down on that eastern side of the property?
Well, I don't know if there's, I think, approximately 160 trees that are coming out. So I'm not sure if they're all mature, what the size was, if it was 12 inches and up that are coming out. And they're pretty much concentrated within that upland area to the west of the parking lot. So we're trying to get that one-to-one. And I think we're going to come in with a revised plan that puts us at that, that area.
And Chairman Schulman, this is a special permit application. They could go in by right with a subdivision, and there's no, and take out every tree. I mean, not within the wetlands or the upland review area. Conservation would probably have an issue with that, but outside of that area, there would be no restrictions, nor would there be a restriction, not that they're going to do this, but they could go out today and bulldoze, and chainsaw down the trees on their property outside of that wetland area. Again, they're not going to do that, but.
The other good thing about not being a subdivision is it'll be an association, and the drainage structures will be maintained so that, so that it improves water quality, and we're not worried about, the drainage, the catch basins clogging or things like that. So it's good that there's an association to maintain that.
Okay. Comments from the other commission members?
Attorney Blank, have you all done any like a type of community outreach with your neighbors?
Due
to the size.
We have been in contact with both of the condominium complexes and the Pepperidge Farm and the apartment complex in front of us. I don't know if there's certainly been notice given, but I don't know if we've heard from or communicated with a handful or so of the single family homes on Fullen. I think those are the only ones that I'm aware of us maybe not having spoken with.
Okay.
Would it be a problem before you come before us again, if you were to offer a meeting with those other homeowners to get their feedback?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't, I think there's only a few of them. So I mean, I don't have any objection to saying that we'll sort of knock on the door and leave something there and try to get in touch with them. and speak with them. I mean, but I don't know if we need to schedule like a formal meeting for them. That might be more harder for them than just knocking on their door.
No, that sounds,
that okay?
what you're suggesting sounds reasonable.
Yes, it does.
Any other questions? Michelle, any staff comments on this?
I think the one major comment, we kind of touched on it already, kind of comparing like what subdivision effects would be and what this elderly housing would be and what the density would look like and things like that. So I think on like the staff level, we were also contemplating and reviewing those elements and what the density and drainage would look like, but yeah.
Okay. Steve, you know, I know this is like a subdivision, but do we have any right to have our in-house consultant do a review of the project?
No, there's not, you know, unfortunately or fortunately, maybe, I guess, depending on your perspective, there are no standards for him to apply. I mean, you do have the right to hire an outside consultant if you felt it was necessary. My recommendation would be to, you know, if you had concerns, you know, about drainage, you might look to have an outside engineer. I don't think in this case that would be the case. You know, if you had concerns about the traffic generated as a result of this, you have the authority to hire a traffic consultant. I don't know if this would rise to that level. Since the architecture is, you know, single family or you know, duplex type housing, you know, I think it's talking amongst yourselves about your comfort level with the design as presented. I don't know, you know, there's not like I said, there's not a standard for them to apply this to say this doesn't meet your requirements or not meet the requirements. My 2 cents on this, I think the concerns that will get evaluated, staff is fairly comfortable flagging. I know, you know, Michelle, Alexis, and myself have talked about there was an area that had some more mature trees that wasn't necessarily a regulated area per the Conservation Commission, but the area that, you know, was proposed to be removed, that, you know, obviously it's within their rights to do so. However, keeping in mind that they are requesting a special permit for added density that they wouldn't get as of right. So those are the kind of things that we can flag for you and have you, you know, contemplate and consider when you're reviewing the project.
Okay. I didn't raise the issue because I was concerned about those other issues. The architecture just strikes me as you know, plebeian and could be better. And maybe that's not an issue to raise at this point, but maybe it's something we'll talk to the consultants we've hired for the rewrite of the zoning regs and get something in there that gives us a better handle on design that we're not entirely satisfied with.
Yeah, I mean, it is, you know, it is a special permit application. So there are the special permit criteria which are applicable to this application and any other. And if you have particular concerns or suggestions related to the design, I mean, now would be a good time to, you know, mention them. Or if you think of something in the next, you know, day or week or so, we can convey that to the applicant and they can take another look at what's being proposed. And if there's enhancements that they can make, you know, they can consider those.
Okay. Any other comments? Right. If not, do we have to take any formal action, or will it simply go now to conservation?
Yeah, it's still pending with conservation. So once they've kind of look like they're set to make their decision, we'll schedule the public hearing from there.
Okay. Fair enough. Attorney Blank, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the final action under review and action on new applications is 2021-20. R/M zoning commission, building zone regulation text amendment to create the East Norwalk Village TOD zone and to allow dwelling units and artists live workspaces within the industrial #1 zone within designated areas on the map entitled designated. Is that 11 properties or 2 properties?
Probably I-1.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's I-1 properties for residential units in East Norwalk by special permit in conjunction with building zone map amendment to create the EVTZ preliminary review. I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Sure. So I'll share screen here as soon as I can find. I always have too many windows open, so I can be tracking down where I had this. It's always tricky. Give me 1 sec. And just there we go. Just a quick, kind of summary. This is we've talked about this, briefly at your last couple of meetings in terms of the TOD plan that was adopted and the subsequent step of enacting the zoning regulations that follow that. So that's kind of the next step in the process. And I forwarded those to you and I'm having, oh, there we go. Sorry, found my screen. Can you guys see that? Before I get going?
Yeah, it just came up.
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully you can see the map is loading as we speak. Is that all visible to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, let me zoom out just a little bit. Okay, so, and this map is up on the city page under the application. And if anybody does not have the link, I'm happy to share that. So just giving everybody some orientation, here's Norwalk River. Here is I-95 exit 16. Here is the East Norwalk train station on, obviously the tracks on both sides. And here is East Avenue, which is kind of the north-south spine that runs through the middle of the area. So the zoning appendix that was part of the East Norwalk TOD plan had 2 kind of components that we've discussed in review before. The first is the creation of the EVTZ, which is the East Norwalk TOD Village District, which are indicated in these grayish kind of hatched parcels here. They run on the east and west side of East Avenue, which again runs north-south, and also along this this stretch of down through by Van Zandt Street as well, and wraps around the historic cemetery here. The regulations, right now, the majority of these properties are neighborhood business, and the recommendation is to rezone them to the new zone. And also part of that, which we can discuss separately, but as you know, there is the study of the industrial zones going on, so it may make sense to hold off on any changes on that until those get wrapped in. I think some of the recommendations in this document are similar to what the consultant is talking about, but it may make sense just to hold off on that piece of it. And the last thing on here, you'll see these blue parcels. These parcels are currently zoned neighborhood business, and the plan recommends rezoning these to C residential. So that would be actually sort of a downzoning of those parcels. As you recall, the Winfield Street project that was the first application was denied, and then we're now pending litigation on that. And then the applicant came back with a second iteration, which was subsequently approved. That's this property here. And again, there's some additional NB properties on the south and west side of the entire study area. So that's kind of just giving you a sense of the geography of the area and the where we're talking about making the changes. And then next, I'll just run through really quickly, and hopefully everybody can see that the bulk and height standards of what's proposed.
Can you blow that up at all?
Yep.
That's
How's
better.
that? That's better. Okay, so for comparison purposes, I left on here 2 additional zones just to give you a sense of, what some of the, more similar standards and more similar zones are. And really, like, as I said, the area where the new zone is located is currently zoned neighborhood business. So that's kind of the base model to look at. So the base of the EVTZ and one of the big areas of concern that was expressed by the neighbors as part of this was the height proposed. So the base height is 2.5 stories, 35 feet in the neighborhood business. That's proposed to remain in the new zone. However, through the special permit process, you can go to 3.5 stories and 45 feet. And we'll go through that piece in a little bit. We did make a change to have a minimum lot area of 10,000 square feet. That really only affects subdivision if somebody was going to divide a property. So anything that's existing is, it wouldn't really affect them at all. Very similar to the lot width requirement. A change is that there is no longer a front yard requirement, and we have a maximum front yard requirement. So that kind of says we want the buildings to be a little closer to the street to make them a little more pedestrian friendly. But we put the maximum in there to, also allow for some variation. So doesn't all have to be at the street. And maybe there's an opportunity where they wanted to have a different feature in the front. And again, we will continue to, if that number 10 feet is what we're proposing, maybe we can take a look if it should be increased. If there was somebody had a better idea, that's something we could always discuss at a later point. And we do have a requirement to set the building back where it abuts residence zone. Another change from the NB zone is that as you'll see here, the density allowed in the NB zone is currently 1,650 square feet of lot area per unit. That remains for the base, similar to the 2.5 stories, 3 feet. But through the special permit process, which we'll go through, you can go to 1 unit and 825 square feet. So that's kind of where we get to the special permit process itself. I unshared myself by accident. Let me reshare myself here. Okay. All right, and I'll pull up the text, and hopefully you had a chance to at least skim through it and get somewhat familiar with it. Okay, and I have no intention to go through this word for word. One thing that came out, and we discussed this a couple of different times, one thing that came out during the process, which the residents expressed, also the Planning Commission and the Planning Committee of Common Council expressed, was the need to make this, very walkable, and also make it an area where there were like areas of congregation for people to meet and gather. And those areas should be green when if possible. And, green means a lot of things to different people, but, have a lot of vegetation around, be shaded and not just necessarily hard surface or necessarily just exposed to the sun all the time. So the idea of different ways to provide those areas was something that they wanted to see included as a requirement, and that goes to the amenity structure as it's proposed. So the initial amenity structure, which I'll get to in just a little bit, had a menu of options, and if you met these point thresholds, and these would be by special permit and subject to review and approval by the commission, theoretically, if you met those standards and the amenities proposed were in line with what was included in the zoning, then you would be eligible for the special permit. The sentiment expressed by many, and I believe also echoed by this commission, was that the core of that amenity should be kind of sustainable and green amenities. So that's one change we've made in this draft from what you saw from prior drafts. It's important to point out that this new zone is a village district. You have a couple of village districts now, but oddly enough, your village districts don't necessarily have village district standards with them, which is kind of one of the key things that the statute says you need to have as part of your village districts. So this zone, and I sent the document to you yesterday, so I don't expect anybody to have really a chance to digest it, has a separate document, which are the design guidelines, which kind of dictate how we want the buildings to look how we want the site to look, how we want the landscaping to be, the signage, the treatment of the asphalt and the pavement and sidewalks and all those kind of things. So that's laid out, and hopefully they're in a state where a prospective applicant will look at them and kind of know what the commission is looking for from the offset. I think I'm hoping they're a little more advanced than some of the other design guidelines that we've recently looked at in South Norwalk and Wall Street areas. But again, it's a step in the right direction. They may not be the model for everything we do in the future, but I think it's a step in the right direction. So the idea is that there are, by site plan approval, we tried to make the uses as broad as possible in terms of what's allowed in those areas. I think we covered a pretty broad spectrum of uses. And some of them are taken from the existing NB zone and some other zones. But I think it's trying to be as less restrictive as possible through the site plan process. But then we do put in caps on certain things based on the size. So for example, as you're familiar with the Winfield Street applications, if you're under 10 units, you can proceed via site plan. You'd still be subject to design review. But if you went above 10 units, you would be subject to special permit, which brings in the other criteria. And then again, the special permit, one of the big special permit triggers would be the amenity structure. And I'm going to jump down to that. Just to flag the similar historic preservation regulations for what we have in the other zones is also included here. East Norwalk, particularly in this zone, there aren't too many historic structures, so I don't think that's something that would be prevalent in this area. Again, here is where it talks about the multifamily when it gets above certain sizes. And there's a few things I've taken out of the text from the draft that you previously saw. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that, but I did remove a couple things just because I just didn't think that they made sense to keep going forward. I'm going to skip the accessory uses. There's nothing overly remarkable to speak about with those. Here's where it starts to get a little more specific to the zone. I have number 3. I neglected to mention this was something that we discussed previously was the consultant TPUDC, who is doing the update of the zoning regulations, took the draft zoning and gave it a kind of like a peer review and made numerous recommendations. And I think I included their report with that. One of those which they brought up, which I thought was a really good point, was that the last draft of the regulations required that there be a street activating use all along East Avenue. So basically that had to be some kind of like commercial activity there. They said, going forward, given the way society is changing, you may not want to have everything be required to have that ground floor commercial use, just because what happens if you can't fill those spaces? It'd be worse to have vacancies than not vacancies. And so they came up with what I thought was a really good suggestion was make sure that the first floors are built to accommodate those commercial uses should the market be there to support those. And so we kind of came up with somewhat of a compromise where we said where the buildings are on a corner, that the corner has to be street activating use, and then 50% of the East Avenue frontage has to be street activating use. So that doesn't mean the whole frontage has to. So that allows for, it could be a residential use on the ground floor. So you're not dealing with a vacancy, but it's built to accommodate a commercial use should that become viable or desirable at a future date.
Steve, can I just ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So effectively what that means is the first floor may be used for residential, but the height is that it could easily be commercial if needed. And that's all that it's really doing at that point in time.
Right. And the 15 feet, I want to circle back with the consultant. I think that's the height they indicated to me was like a normal ground floor. So I'm going to reach out to them again, and also Bob Griswold's to get his take.
Gotcha. And could there be residential on a lot of those main floors with the current instance of the regulations that we're
There's
looking at?
nothing, right. There's nothing preventing that.
Gotcha. So all those buildings on East Ave could convert or don't know, convert's the wrong word, but could use those first floors as residential, and some of them are commercial today, right?
Yeah,
Or
I'd
many
say
of them
probably
are commercial.
I'd say most of them are commercial. There are
Yeah.
pockets up towards Olmsted that have some residential, but I believe most of them are commercial now. And
Gotcha.
Michelle, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misstating that they couldn't do, I think they can do residential on the ground floor now. I don't believe there's anything preventing them.
I
Yeah,
think
you're
so.
right.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
In this map here, as I mentioned, this map here might need to get changed now that I look at the other diagram, but yeah, this diagram hopefully explains a little bit better. If this makes sense in reflecting on what I just talked about, it shows kind of one of the intersections along the study area. It indicates that, and it's not to scale, I should point that out. It indicates that the blue lines would be like a theoretical 50% of the frontage along East Avenue having to be ground floor activated. So hopefully that makes sense.
Steve, was there any feedback from the neighbors on that?
So this has not gone out to, it's available on the website publicly.
Okay, so this part has not been,
Right, so this map, this little figure here was in the plan. So, that was part of the discussion we had during the planning process of this, was about the ground floor activation, and, there was a concern of vacancy. So I think we kind of moved in that direction to address some of that.
Right.
But this latest plan hasn't gone out for any kind of public comment yet. It's up and available for public viewing, but has not gone out for anything beyond the commission level. I figured, to me, I thought the appropriate step would be to get this body to a point where you're comfortable with it. And then, we have to go through the public referral process, and there's hearings, and, we can meet with whomever wants to chat about it.
sure.
So the regulations define street activating uses on here. And I think it's a pretty broad spectrum. I know Nick had emailed me about if this was too limiting, so I'm happy if there's other things that you think are appropriate. But I think the fact that we have retail, restaurant, there's personal service establishments, I think, are included in here, and any kind of other use. I think that's kind of the idea. We're trying not to limit anything. So if there's things you think are missing or should be included, I'm happy to add those.
Steve, is there a reason we wouldn't just put a other as approved by the commission or something like that, in case, so we don't have to enumerate every single one?
That's a good question. Let me check with the law department on that, because I don't,
Okay.
you always get nervous about if you have something that's open-ended and then somebody proposes something that you may not think is desirable. And then
Gotcha.
then they say, well, you said other, and this is other. So that's my only pause on that.
Okay, if not, then I guess we'll put thought on, see if anything's missing.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to ask that question. So this is where the section starts talking about the different types of amenities. And I think down below gives the later sections give some pictures and provide the point system with that. And these specific ones, the indoor seating plaza and the outdoor seating plaza, had a little more text to them, as well as what public art is. So I'm just going to scroll down through these, and then if you have questions or comments about any of these as we go through, including the point system. So one thing I want to do before we, finally refer this out is I want to just run through the point system some more and try to run some scenarios. The consultant did that in the plan, so it's been vetted. And I'm also going to work with somebody on the redevelopment staff who's an architect that I think will just provide another set of eyes to this part of it. So I want to make sure it all makes sense at the end of the day. And again, if we think the point system is inappropriate for one area or is skewed too highly or not enough in one direction for a particular amenity, I'm happy to review that and go through it. This is some of the seating areas, the top pictures. Indoor, the bottom are just outdoor seating examples. As you can see, there's some different things, like in the one on the bottom left has some shaded seating, where the one on the bottom right that's kind of a solar powered cell charging station. So if someone's hanging out, they can charge their cell phones, and it's a kind of a green amenity. Some other ones that were, again, here's a powered seating that was it's kind of a green amenity where you can sit, charge your phone, hang out, free Wi-Fi, water filling stations. And we tried to load the points. Oops, sorry, that's my dog. So the points were reflective of kind of like the scale and the scope of what's being proposed. And I think that shows up a little more clearly when you start talking about some of the larger features and some of the other features. So, and these are getting into, and we categorize these too. So by, we try to make them, excuse me, I'm scrolling up fast, I apologize. Yeah, and I lost my, no, here we go. Yeah, sorry. So as this section gets into more of the sustainable features. So we have like a green wall where you have rain gardens, community gardens. Now, some of these developments are not going to be able to just provide a community garden. Maybe one of the larger ones could. Is that feasible? We tried to put things in there that were desired and indicated that people wanted through the public process that we went through. And people talked about community gardens. So if somebody could think that up and get some points for it. And again, if we think those points are too small, we could always adjust those going forward. I'm kind of hoping we see a lot of the rain garden type features because they get incorporated nicely as kind of landscape features. The consultant that TPUDC who looked at this, suggested, why don't you add the pollinator habitat in? So we did provide that. That's why it's highlighted in red text with some different examples of how that could be done. We have the rooftop solar, green roofs and blue roofs are different options. And a couple other I thought that were unique that came up in the process was the idea of, if you provide public parking spaces, you get a credit in the point system for providing those spaces. So if you do 2 public spaces, and these spaces would be similar to what you see at Ironworks, where they have, I think it's 4 or 5 spaces as one of the drives when you pull in, and there's signage there indicating that it's free public parking. So those spaces could be similar to this area, where if you provide 2 spaces, you get 1 point with a maximum of 5 points within that development that could be realized. And the next section kind of indicates how the points are factored in. So as we said, the base is 2.5 stories, 35 feet for the zone. That's what's existing right there right now. So in the density is 1 unit per 1,650 square feet under the current zoning. For some reason, I'm not sure how the initial draft got to 1,035 if you did 15 points. So I actually bumped it up to 1,250 for 15 points. So that moves in the direction of a little less density. Because that's really just cutting it in half. It just seems to make more sense mathematically to me. So if you do 15 points, you're not eligible to go above 2.5 stories and 35 feet, but you can increase your density to 1 unit per 1,250 versus 1 unit per 1,650. So there may be some sites where, it may not make sense for them to go above 2.5 stories regardless, but maybe they could get a little more density on the site. So in order for them to do that, they have to give you 15 points. And the caveat that we put in, which I think is important to highlight here, which was in response to concerns by this body, the Planning Committee, and also Planning Commission, was if you're going to do, so you have to do 15 points to get the additional density, but 10 of those have to be the green or sustainable amenities. So we're trying to push that as much as possible. So I think that's one way to address that. The next category is if you want to go to the 3.5 stories, 45 feet, and jump the density up to 825 square feet per unit, you have to provide 20 points. And if 20 points seems too low, if you want to jump that up to 25 points or something along those lines, I'm happy to look at that a little further and run some more analysis on that. And that also has a caveat where And that one right now, it's at 13 points, have to be the sustainable or green amenities, and we can bump that up to a few things. So again, I don't get like super focused on those numbers, just on, I'm hoping we can get to the point where you're kind of comfortable with the methodology proposed, and then we can spend another meeting going through these numbers in a little more detail, as well as discussing the design guidelines, and make sure you think the whole piece flows together.
Steve, how do you get to 4.5 stories?
You don't.
You
You
don't.
get to 3.5 and 45.
Gotcha. Okay, and 44. So it maxes out at 3.5. Sorry, I was reading here. Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it, right? Those are the two categories. So you can either go to, you can stay at 2.5 stories, 35 feet, and get a little density bump, or you can go up a story and an additional 10 feet and get even further density, provided you give the city more of the amenity features that it's requested.
Could you choose the 20 amenities, 20 points, and get the higher density without going up the story if you wanted to?
Theoretically, yeah. I mean,
Okay,
it's, obviously if you don't put the other story on, it's harder to get that density.
totally.
Just run through. Don't believe there's really much else on here that's significant. What these design guidelines and the regulations do is tighten up the signage. And I think, when TPUDC does the overall zoning rewrite, I'm hopeful they'll tighten up our signage quite a bit, because that's one of the areas of the regulations that's a complete mess, if, for lack of saying it more plainly. I think that's one area that needs help. And so does our parking, the way the parking structure is laid out as well. But I know that was kind of quick summary, quick overview, and I know you probably need to read through this a couple more times to get more familiar and comfortable with it, but I'm happy to take on the other questions or comments you have right now.
What other communities are doing the amenity program like this? And
I don't know of anybody that's doing it necessarily on the point system. We had it initially structured similar to what is like the Wall Street West Ave area.
Mhm.
And I found that to be a little ambiguous the way it was set up. So that's why I thought if we had a point system that was based on criteria, it would be much easier for an applicant to realize, and also for us to regulate. So that way, that's why I think the points numbering system still, let's think about it a little bit more, make sure what's there makes sense. But I think that system is a better system.
And no one on the Wall Street has used any of the amenities features so far, correct?
Not on new applications, but when there was an initial amenity structure set up for the Waypoint developments, when those were approved, I don't know, maybe not 10 years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago.
Gotcha. Okay. That's my only concern with the structure this way, is are people gonna use it or want to use it? But I guess they want the height, so that's what that gives you that will encourage them to use it.
It's the kind of the way I look at it is and it's the same thing we did in South Norwalk when we rezoned the TOD there. You're giving them something. You're giving them the extra story, and you're giving them the density, but in exchange, they're going to give you back an improved development. You're going to
remind me, how did the South Norwalk TOD incentive structure work?
Well, there was less of an incentive structure in there, but the old zoning, I think there was very limited. So that where you could do TOD zoning at the time, as it was called, was very limited in the area, and the height and the density were not very great. So what we did, kind of the trade-off was, all right, we'll give you more height and more density, but we're going to take back additional workforce housing requirements. We want the better designed buildings and improve the process for them. So it was kind of like you give us what we want, because the city had laid out a plan where they wanted density at the train station, which is what the projects you're seeing now are following up on. So we gave them the height and the density, but we get back better design, better projects.
Gotcha.
This is a little different in that in addition to the, the design that we want for the area, we're also requesting these amenities be provided as part of the development. So you're getting improved, public amenities, public space, as well
Right.
as the green infrastructure requirements, which I know you guys are talking about more often.
Steve, what about building some of these things into the regulations themselves? Not the bonuses, but the requirements for what you're here calling amenities, literally requiring them as part of a project of a certain scale.
So there are, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just scroll up, bear with me. There are lot and building requirements similar to any other zone
Right.
that you have. And so they're required to provide public amenity space already. So they're gonna have to put in something similar to what you might see in some of the TOD developments in South Norwalk.
Right.
They have to put in the street activating use regardless of that. I don't know how you tell them you have to put in a pollinator habitat or I don't know how you tell them the way the statutes read now that they have to do green infrastructure. I don't know if we can mandate that at this point. I don't know if we have the statutory authority to do that. So that's why I think if you're saying,
Yeah, I mean, all right, we have to look into whether we have the authority to do some of these things, but why couldn't we say you must do, one of these things must be incorporated into your development? Whether it's a green roof or solar panels or rain garden or whatever else we might have on a list, say that, any project must include one of these without saying it must be this one.
I think that's what it's saying here in the red text under 3A and 3B. So if they want to get that additional, even if it's a little density or a story and density, they have to give you a certain percent. And in this one, it's, it's 2/3 of the amenity points have to come from some of the green or sustainable measures. And they could choose to do the entire thing as the green or sustainable measures, but this thing, at a minimum, you have to use 2/3 of it have to be that.
Right. But that is still different from saying you must do one of these things. Not you must do one of these things to get a benefit. You simply must do one of these things to be able to put up your project.
So you don't require that on any project now, right? So like, if we didn't do anything with this zone and left it NB, in the NB zone, anybody that comes in wouldn't be required to do any of this. They would just put a building up similar to what you saw on Winfield Street. And, if they decided to make it look nice because they think they can get more money for the units that way, they would do that. If they said, I don't really care, I'm just going to get what I get. And you see that as well. So there's nothing that's what my point was initially. I'm not sure if we have any authority to tell somebody they have to do green amenities on their project. Similar to what you just looked at with Fullen Road, when we rewrote the text for that, the elderly housing special permit application, we said you have to do solar with that.
Right.
That was one of the requirements. This one, we're not saying you have to do solar or you have to do a rain garden. you have to do something of this category that we've classified as part of this list of amenities.
Well, I'm wondering then maybe this is something we would want to address again as part of the rewrite of the regulations themselves, assuming we have the authority to do it.
Yeah, that's on the list. That
Okay.
definitely isn't, and we can separately follow up with the law department about requiring that. I've not seen that anywhere in Connecticut. I mean,
Right.
Brian and I have looked at this a couple of times. I know Boston did that with a zone. They did one area, they did a pretty broad rezoning and they incorporated that as a requirement. But it was also an upzoning at the time. So I think that's kind of almost the same approach, which I think we're taking here, is I think we want, the idea of putting this plan together, keeping in mind this was a state grant that we got, the state had recognized that this is an area that needed, it was a mainline train station that needed, a little TLC and a little shot in the arm.
Right.
And this is one way to get that, there's no reason for somebody to, there's a reason, and I'm sorry, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but there's a reason a lot of these East Avenue properties haven't improved for so long, because there's no incentive for any of these property owners to improve them. The existing regulations provide no incentive for improvement. That's why we're putting some carrots into the regulations.
Steve, why
I
don't we
think-
stop it? Oh, go ahead, Brian, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think what Steve just said was kind of what I was thinking is the base zoning of this right here is kind of what exists now. So, and that's kind of been stagnant for, a while now. So now essentially by saying, if you do these amenities, you get these bonuses, it's kind of like requiring it without requiring it in order to do these kind of developments.
Okay, I'm sorry, Steve, I stopped your momentum.
No, because, I no, we don't need to I don't really need to rehash the history of the East Norwalk TOD zoning for you tonight.
Right.
Don't worry, there's a 100-page document that does that for us. Why do we stop at 3.5 stories? If we're really looking to juice it?
Well, I'll be, when I kind of, my planner hat, and when I was thinking about TOD in this area, I never really thought it was going to get much higher than that, just given the area. And there, to be honest with you, it was at times a struggle getting it, and there's a lot of people that think 2.5 stories is more than enough there. They don't want to go any higher. They wanted to, there was a lot of discussion of trying to keep it at 3. And the argument that I made, and I think, the folks that were on the committee for the most part agreed with, and the consultant was on board with, was if you do 3 stories, you're going to get a flat roof, and that's all you're going to get. The half story allows for pitched roofs and the property owner to get some additional floor area under that roof. That's why you do the half story versus the 3. But there really was no appetite to bump it up beyond 3.5. That 3.5 was a tough enough sell as it was.
Do you think that's actually going to activate the area?
I think over time, it certainly will. There are some other challenges with the district as it is. There are a lot of small parcels and a lot of fractured ownership. So that's going to, it's not like you're assembling 3 half-acre pieces of property and getting an 1.5 acre site where you have a lot more freedom and flexibility. You've got a lot of parcels that are 10,000 square feet and 3 different people own them. So to get together, by the time, you still have to provide parking, and parking is expensive to build and it's expensive to locate on the property. So in order to combine enough parcels to get an actionable site, you're going to have to get somebody that's got some stamina for holding out to, they may buy property A may come available, but property B may not become available for 2 years. So they may have to sit on these for a few years till they can put these pieces together to get a viable site, to get a workable project, to realize the goals of the plan, but also for them to make some profit.
Right, but that would lead me to think that up would be a direction that they could go faster than out, right? And or do we consider taking parking off the table a little bit or ease the restriction there?
Well, the parking number we have proposed, and we revised that, the standard a while ago, is for multifamily, it's 1.3 spaces per unit. They can drop that down under the workforce housing regulations. They can drop it down, which is what Spinnaker is doing as part of the Monroe Street development. They're dropping it down to 1 per unit. That may not always be appropriate in every location and every site. But the 1.3 in that number is a number that has been worked through a couple different ways. One, it's been based on parking counts that developers have witnessed on their own properties, and also what staff has done in the past by going out and looking at properties at different times of the day and even at night to seeing how many spaces are full. And we've also been told by developers that banks don't like to lend below 1.3 in our area. That's been a number that they've said. Below that, we're not sure if that's, we're still car centric. Even if we're talking about TOD, we're still car centric.
That's interesting. That bank point's interesting.
Don't they have, aren't there a lot of, well-founded complaints from neighbors when there's, 1.3 parking, let alone reducing it? The 2-bedroom apartment, if you have a couple, odds are they'll have 2 cars, or that's not an unreasonable expectation that they have 2 cars, that they park on the neighboring streets.
Right, yeah, and a side note to that, I'm hopeful I got to touch base with the TMP folks, but we did, one of the recommendations of the plan was to also do to implement a residential parking permit program. So that way, who's ever parking on the street is supposed to live there, not be train parking or parking from development X that's parking on 2 streets over. So I think that's just as kind of a side note.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay.
Good.
Anything else, Steve?
No, I think we'll put the item back on your next agenda. Hopefully it's, we can have a further discussion and get into the design guidelines. Feel free to, reach out with any questions or comments you have about that. The design guidelines are, it's a different type of document. It's not a regulation, so it's a little different, but it just kind of lays out the theme, which is kind of an overall maritime theme of how we want to see the area develop.
Right. Okay. All right, shall we move on the agenda? We're fairly close to being done. Status report on the industrial zone study.
Sure, so we have a draft in the office that we're reviewing, making edits on, and we're going to send back to the consultant. So I expect that probably in 2 to 3 weeks, the draft will go out to the committee that's overseeing the study, and they'll have a few weeks to digest it and make comments. And once those comments have been incorporated by the consultant, then we'll put it out for public consumption, and then, see what they say, and then look at adopting and implementing the changes that are outlined in that. The other part of it where I was before I came to your meeting was I got the additional money allocated to look at the waterfront portion of the industrial zone study. So that's going to happen over the next month or so. They'll start working on that piece of it.
Okay, and you may remember on that study, we're continuing Richard Rowena on the committee, but I know Galen's very interested in that. So Galen is also going to be sitting on that committee. Okay, zoning regulation rewrite.
I think almost everybody here has scheduled a time to chat with the consultant. If you have not, please let me know as soon as possible, and I will get that scheduled. They want the meetings in July, so they'll send out a Zoom invite, but I think most people are there. We have a meeting next week with all the department heads that kind of interact with zoning and the consultant, so that's like a 2-hour meeting. And then in July, towards the end of July is kind of the first public presentation where they're just going to kind of go over the process. Here's the things that we're thinking about. And then the big public meeting happens in September, where it's kind of the multi-day event. That's like, I can't firm that up yet because we're not sure. Will we be able to do that in person at that point in time? Will we have to still do it over Zoom? Too early to tell. But I'll have more details on that going forward.
Okay.
Hey, Steve, can you send out a confirmation of the times that we have? You know, I signed up for something and I had a clear space on my calendar, you know, because it's long, long.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I
I'll
need
do that tomorrow.
on my calendar.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll send everybody an email tomorrow just to say, hold your date on there, and then you'll get a further invite.
Yeah, because I wasn't sure it really went through and
Yeah,
et cetera.
understood.
Okay, South Norwalk TOD.
I think we talked about a little bit. They're working on they had some draft ideas that they shared with the committee a couple of weeks ago. And then they're going back with some further public engagement. I think it's District B, right? That's what I said before. I think I was right. Monday night. So I'll be there in attendance with Jessica and Brian Bedoli from Redevelopment.
Okay. Next, the housing bills, you want to update?
Yeah, and Brian, please chime in. I know that the bill was passed and signed. We go through it. The one thing with, and Brian, if you want to, I'll let you chat about the ADUs and if you had any concerns there. The only item that I flagged that was a problem, which we just talked about, was the parking standards. They've said you can't do more than, the legislation was, unless you opt out, you can't require more than one space per studio or one bedroom. I ran the numbers on one project and I want to do it on a couple other ones. And like the Spinnaker project on Monroe Street would actually, under one of our scenarios, it would require less parking than we would require. And as I said, I think our 1.3 number is based on some pretty good basis. So I think we might be good to opt out of that. And I still think our parking standards are fairly liberal in terms of what we require, and I think makes sense. So that my recommendation there might be to opt out of that provision, and I think we can back it up with some good science.
Yeah, for the accessory dwellings, I think based on the language, I think you'd probably be looking at pretty much rewriting what we have for our accessory apartments. Not that it's a bad change or anything like that, but it's enough change that we'd have to revise a lot of our text. It does have an opt-out provision, just like the parking, and I have a memo that I could send around for you all to take a look at.
Good.
Yeah, please do that. I don't think there was anything, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, I don't think there was anything in there that jumped out to us there was a few things that were a little different, but I don't think there was anything that our ADU language now is fairly liberal in what it allows. So I don't think there's anything in there that we had big objections to.
Okay, combining the planning and zoning commissions. You want to give that update, Steve?
Sure, I'll keep flying away. Yeah, so that's the ordinance committee met on that a couple weeks ago to discuss it. It seems like there was not like strong, no one was doing cartwheels, I wouldn't say, but I think the general impression was they thought it was a good idea, provided that the workload wouldn't be such that the combined commission would be overwhelmed. Lou and I had met with Tom Livingston earlier today, and we talked about a couple of different things with the capital budget process, which I think would lighten up that significant chunk of new work that you guys are not used to, which I think in the end of the day might make what the planning commission does on that front more meaningful anyway, because right now, basically the planning commission puts a capital budget together and it is what it is. And the mayor ends up putting together his own capital budget. So it's not, the planning commission's capital budget's not bound to anything. Or he's not bound to anything that they put forward. So I think maybe there's a more meaningful process that can come out of this for that aspect.
Okay, let's move on to the item I brought up first, but we couldn't act on because we didn't have enough members who were at the last meeting. And that is approval of the minutes of May 19th. Can I again have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, Galen moves second.
I'll second it.
Okay, been moved and seconded. Any discussion, any changes? And if not, we'll call the question. All those in favor, just raise your hand. So we've got Galen, myself, Josh,
Gosh.
wait, we still, oh, no, and Rod.
Right.
Right, and then Michael and Nick were not at the meeting, so they're abstaining. Okay, good. Comments of director?
Nothing more.
Okay, I have just one thing that and this is usually the time of the meeting where this issue comes up. And I'm as guilty of it as anyone else. We sometimes speak too freely about other people, other projects, especially during this time of the meeting when we tend to be more informal. And we've got to keep in mind that it's probably a small handful, but there are a handful of people who are listening to everything we say and reporting back to other people when we misspeak or inadvertently say something that we shouldn't say about a project. So I just want to put us all on notice regarding that, to just be a little more self-aware of what we say so that we don't, I mean, it could amount to actually, there may be a project that we don't approve, that when it goes to court because of something inappropriate, one of us or even all of us have said, gets reversed. And that's really the last thing I think we want to see happen. So just an alert on that. And with that, I would, unless there are comments from other commissioners, I'd welcome a motion to adjourn. Josh moves, we adjourn. Michael seconds. All in favor, just raise your hands. My goodness, it's unanimous. All right, see you all a little later in the month.